Yo, what's up, legends? This is Chronos, and we're diving into part 3 of What If Deku Had Energy Absorption Quirk. Things are heating up, and I'm super excited to share this next chapter with you. Huge shout out to the legend, Big Tedig 3498, for being the creative genius behind this collab. Your support keeps this series rolling strong. As always, a massive thank you to all my legends out there for sticking with me. Let's get right into it and see what Deku's got in store for us today. Chapter 15, Yeild. Izuku and Kaminari return to the student stands with arms full of snacks just in time for the match between Tokoyami and Bakugo to start. As he has expected, Tokoyami didn't last long with Bakugo's explosion lighting up the area. Dark Shadow did take a page from Uraraka playback and tore up the ground to launch debris at Bakugo. It delayed him only slightly enough for the Quirk to try again, but Bakugo was faster and landed on Tokoyami. The gang of friends ate their snacks as they watched the last match before the finals. Toru gave Izuku a beaming smile in thanks for the food, and both Kaminari and Mina smirked at the Greenette's small blush while talking to their invisible friend. Meanwhile, Aizawa was cursing in his head because of the upcoming match. Nizu had already called him to warn Midnight and Cementos. He had struggled to press the mic button on the staff's headsets, but he managed finally. Nem, be very vigilante in the next match. Aizawa's voice was muffled by the bandages, but went through enough to be understood. What? Expecting an attack. Midnight looked around casually in the stands for any danger. Should we call off the match? Cementos butted in. Not an attack, Midoriya, and Bakugo have some bad history. Midnight snorted. Come on, show. It's not like in past years never had anything similar. They'll just fight it out and then they will be like nothing ever happened. Not the same. Be ready to stop the match. Aizawa let go of the comms button and Midnight thinned her lips in concern. Bakugo was given 15 minutes to rest between the semifinals and the finals. He spent them in the waiting room. Meanwhile, Izuku finished his snacks with his friends. No, I prefer the teriyaki, Izuku decided. I mean, sweet and sour is alright, but I like this one better. Nah, barbecue is where it's at. Mina wiped her face with a napkin. Midoriya, shouldn't you be getting down there? Zero pointed down to the field. I'll be there when they call my name, he said cryptically. Toru narrowed her eyes at him and pinched his arm. What are you planning? Stop that and nothing. I'm not planning anything. He rubbed where she had squeezed his skin together. Just at that time, Midnight called Izuku to the stage. Izuku got up from his seat, kicked off his shoes, and then jumped off the railing from the students' stands. He heard a few shouts of panic from his friends and classmates, but with a small release of kinetic through his feet, he landed near where he should have. The crowd loved that and cheered louder. As for his friends, Kaminari and Mina cheered along. Zero clapped, and Toru glared daggers at him. He gave an apologetic smile towards her and then turned to where Bakugo was walking on stage. Bakugo was glaring across the stage toward Izuku. For his part, he looked calmly back at his tormentor for the past 10 years. His placid face hid the roiling anger and loathing toward the blonde before him. Do you remember the rules? Midnight looked to Bakugo for an answer and he nodded. Then she looked at Izuku. Lost by ring out, tapping out, unconsciousness, or can't continue. No lethal attacks and no unsportsmanlike actions. I remember them perfectly. Midnight gave Izuku another look as if she was trying to read him, but Izuku revealed nothing. Correct. We will stop the match if you break any rules, or we decide things have gone too far. Midnight reiterated. Let the final match start. Izuku and Bakugo stared at each other for a full 10 seconds. Izuku showed nothing on his face and Bakugo was giving Izuku a deeper scowl by the second. The first move was by Izuku taking a step forward and then another. He walked forward until he reached the 5 steps and then Bakugo acted by launching forward with a yell and blasted Izuku. He didn't dodge or react in any way as the explosions covered him. Bakugo didn't let up as he twisted around and struck at Izuku's back. Again and again, Bakugo moved around Izuku as he blasted him from any angle he could. After a full minute of this, Bakugo backed off to see the results. In the smoke, Izuku stood with his shirt in ruins. His skin was soot-stained but unharmed by the explosions. The only thing Izuku did other than absorb the heat and kinetic energy was hold his breath, so he didn't inhale the smoke. The crowd watched in silence as the smoke cleared enough for Izuku to be visible. With a blast of kinetic energy from all sides, the smoke was cleared. Bakugo glared at Izuku with anger at showing him up, but before he could say anything, Izuku did while emitting thermal energy to make the air distorted around the arena. "I'm going to make you yield." With that, Izuku leaned forward and blasted toward Bakugo with kinetic energy. His fist connected with Bakugo's unprotected stomach, and the blonde bent over from the impact. Then the secondary blast came and Bakugo was launched back. The kinetic blast from his fist was twofold what Izuku delivered physically, and it showed as Katsuki tried to suck air in and only managed to throw up what food he had in his stomach. Meanwhile, Izuku began to walk around the downed blonde and put himself between the edge of the ring and his target. He waited until the villain got back up on unsteady legs. With a roar, Bakugo launched forward with an explosion. He tried to dodge when Izuku raised his hand and aimed it at Bakugo, but he wasn't faster than lightning. The bolt hit him directly in the shoulder and he cried in pain. Izuku didn't stop after that and met the head-on charge with his own. The only difference was that Izuku released more energy than Bakugo, and he was launched back and bounced off the ground multiple times until he stopped with his arm hanging limp at his side. Izuku began to walk forward again as Bakugo tried to get up with his hand on his injured shoulder. With a shaking hand, he relocated his shoulder and turned just in time to get a heel to his chest. Izuku propelled forward until he caught up with Katsuki and grabbed him before throwing him to the center of the ring. The blast Bakugo launched at Izuku was nothing to pay attention to. The bomber stopped his momentum with his explosion but wasn't fast enough for the next lightning bolt that hit his leg. With some panic, Bakugo put his hands together to make a flash bomb to get some space, but the bright light was absorbed into Izuku, who was already above him. He grabbed his head and slammed his knee into his nose, shattering it and making Bakugo see stars. Trying to get space, the blonde made a smokescreen with his quirk, but that didn't slow Izuku down. Switching to thermal vision, Izuku rocketed forward and slammed a palm on Bakugo's ribs. With a crack, Bakugo was sent out of the smoke. Izuku calmly walked out of the smoke and to a laying Bakugo trying to get up. "Bakugo, can you continue?" Midnight asked in hopes the blonde would give up. "Yes." Bakugo growled out and stood up to see Izuku between the edge of the ring and him. He sneered again. "Time to end this farce." Izuku watched as Bakugo launched himself upwards and began to spin rapidly with his explosions. For his part, Izuku calmly raised his arm and absorbed all the heat Bakugo produced, waste not, and all that. With a loud explosion, Izuku met Bakugo's super mover head-on. In the smoke, Katsuki's hand was on Izuku's face with smoke still rising. With wide eyes, he tried to retreat, but Izuku was faster. Propelled with kinetic energy blasts, Izuku reached Bakugo and grabbed him by the face just like he was just a second before and then slammed him into the ground. Izuku didn't stop there as he picked him up and threw him out of the smoke for all to see. With blood dripping down his head, he stumbled to his feet. Izuku walked out of the smoke calmly again and waited for Bakugo to make another move. "Do you yield?" Izuku asked as he walked between the blonde and the edge of the ring. "Fuck you, I don't yield." Bakugo spat out. "You will." Izuku launched a spray of electricity at Bakugo. He jumped up and dodged it but was met with a kinetic strike to his face. Bakugo launched his counterattacks, but they were absorbed by Izuku before they could connect with his skin. Katsuki took hit after hit while Izuku was getting more thermal energy for his core. The kinetic was being redirected back at the blonde. With the mounting heat, Bakugo was begun to dehydrate with every explosion, and every second Izuku kept releasing his thermal energy. Bakugo backed off and tried to kick Izuku out of the ring, but was blinded by the light energy Izuku flashed. While blinded, Izuku grabbed the outstretched leg and used kinetic energy around his body to launch Bakugo back into the middle of the ring, hard. Bakugo struggled to get back up, but he was injured, dehydrated, and tired. But his stubbornness didn't let him stop. Izuku waited for Bakugo to get up as he circled him. The crowd long had stopped cheering at the one-sided beatdown. At this point, they were watching a predator play with its prey. "Do you yield?" Izuku asked again, knowing the answer. "Fuck you," he gasped out. Izuku waited again until Bakugo made the first move, and he did with a small explosion. Izuku let it hit and absorbed what it expelled. Sweat poured off of his face, but Katsuki tried again and again to hurt Izuku in any way, but it did nothing as he absorbed anything thrown at him. He dodged the next attack and kicked Bakugo's knee as he moved. He fell to the other and Izuku held his hand aimed at his face. "Bakugo, Katsuki, do you yield?" Midnight called out. Katsuki ignored the question and tried to launch another attack at Izuku, but it did nothing. He fell back to his knee but couldn't get back up. Izuku steadily increased the heat as Bakugo tried to think of anything, but the heat was too much. "Do you yield?" Izuku asked again. Bakugo opened his mouth to say something multiple times until he gritted his teeth and spoke. "I yield." With a bowed head, the heat immediately was absorbed and Izuku turned to leave the quiet arena. Bakugo knelt there as the cool air washed over him. Robots came and put him on a stretcher to get him to the nurse's station. Izuku arrived there first to get some more clothes. "Are you going to hit me again?" Izuku asked when he stepped through the doors. "What you did to that boy was unacceptable," Recovery Girl said instead. Izuku moved past her and grabbed some new clothes. "What he did to me for 10 years and then get here is unacceptable." He scowled without looking in her direction. "And are you going to keep this grudge up for 10 years? Recovery Girl shot back. "No, until he is locked away or I'm dead. And I don't plan to die anytime soon." He glared at the old woman as she took a side. She barred him from leaving with her cane. "That is not very heroic behavior." Izuku looked at the cane and then at her. "Then should I stop trying to be a hero? Or should I let past sins be ignored because he has a powerful quirk?" He didn't wait for her response as he coated his hand in thermal energy and sliced through the cane. He absorbed the heat from the ends of the cane and left. Bakugo was being rolled in just at that moment and Izuku ignored the blonde who kept his eyes closed. Toru was waiting in the hallway leading to the nurse's station and his friends were farther back. Izuku didn't know how to feel about them watching him beat down Bakugo and he began to feel anxious and nervous. He looked down from Toru's worried gaze. She approached him and took his hand and guided him through the halls to the waiting room. She sat him down and she sat across from him with her hands still in his. "How do you feel?" she asked first. "I don't know." He paused and looked up to see her patiently waiting. "I feel frustrated still. Scared of what you guys will think of me, and I don't know." Toru tightened her grip on his hands. "I don't blame you for what you did to Bakugo. From everything you've told me about him, he deserves it and even more. But I don't want you to go mad in pursuit of revenge. I don't want to see you lose yourself." She sniffed and Izuku looked up to see her crying with a smile. "I'm sorry. I just wanted him to feel like I did for so long." He began to cry as well. Toru got up from her seat and grabbed him in a tight hug. I know because if I could I would probably do the same in your shoes." She chucked a bit at the end. Izuku hugged her back and cried some more. "Thank you for not leaving me. For everything. You don't have to thank me every time. I'll know and that's enough for me." She pulled back and held his face with a smile while she wiped his tears with her thumbs. Izuku felt the feeling of being wanted and he would give anything to keep the feeling forever. He smiled and nodded in forever thanks. "And congratulations on winning the sports festival. I think we should all go out to eat, what do you say?" She wiped her face also as she stood up. Izuku hesitated at the thought of the others. "They won't care for what I did? The original gang knows what he did to you. Tokoyami is a bit spooked but not scared. Dark Shadow is more in awe, I think." She pulled him up from the chair. "All right, I'll change and meet you guys outside." He nodded. She giggled. "You still need to do the medal ceremony." He wrinkled his nose at the idea. He opened his mouth but she beat him to the punch. "No, you can't skip it. The faster you get past it, the faster we can get something good to eat." Izuku grumbled when she answered his unasked request. Toru walked out of the waiting room and closed the door behind her. The gang plus Tokoyami were waiting across the hallway for them. They all had some variation of worry written on their faces. She spoke before any of them could ask. "He's all right. He was more worried about what we would think of him than anything else. We talked for a bit and he's better now." She explained to everyone's relief. "Good, you're good at helping him through things. Almost like your seductive charm is high." Zero smirked at her. The invisible girl turned to glare at Kaminari, who couldn't see her angry face. "I told you not to tell people." He put up his hands in peace. "I didn't. I swear. Then how did he know? She jabbed a finger at Zero. About you having the hots for Midoriya? It wasn't hard to figure out. He shrugged. That's cute. Good luck on ya. Jairu smiled encouragingly at her. Tokoyami nodded once. May your heart guide you true. Now everyone knows. Toru hit her face with the same effect as not hiding her face. Izuku walked out right at that time and stopped when everyone's eyes swiveled to him. What's going on? Zero, Mina, and Kaminari in unison said. Nothing. Jairu and Tokoyami nodded in agreement. They're just messing with Hagakure. Nothing to worry about. Jairu explained for his benefit with a smile. Izuku narrowed his eyes in suspicion and tried to read them but could only tell it wasn't bad. If you say so, he said unconvinced. It's fine. Let's get to the medal ceremony. Toru grabbed Izuku's arm and began to drag him away from the smirking faces of their friends. The crowd cheered as Izuku stood on the podium for first place with Bakugo quietly in second and Kaminari and Tokoyami in third. Kaminari was the most animated one out of everyone on the center stage. Izuku was both happy that he had won the festival and annoyed at the ludicrous amount of ceremony. He will have to get used to it if he wants to become a hero, he suppose. Midnight walked out and began to speak into the microphone. Here are the winners of this year's UA Sports Festival. More cheering ensued and Izuku absorbed the sound around his head. And to hand out the medals, All Might, I am here. The number one hero landed with a laugh and the crowd went wild. Midnight approached with the box of medals and he began in third place. Tokoyami took the medal graciously with words of encouragement from the hero, followed by a hug. Kaminari went next, but he had a neutral expression as he received his award. Ever since Izuku told them about his encounter with All Might, they all had some distaste for the loved hero. All Might was a bit put off by the usual jovial boy's demeanor but moved on to Bakugo. The blonde inclined his head for the silver medallion and was given the same treatment as the others. Finally, it was Izuku's turn. With a strained smile, the hero placed the gold medal on Izuku's neck, who had a neutral expression the whole time. When the hero pulled back to hug him like the others, Izuku spoke without changing expressions. If you touch me, I will release all my kinetic energy into you. The hero's face tightened. Bakugo heard and snapped his head to the two. Kaminari snorted, and Tokoyami raised his feathery eyebrows. All Might turned around to finish the ceremony. Let's finish this year with our school motto. Go beyond. Plus ultra. The crowd finished, and Izuku wasted no time and left with All Might's eyes on the back of his skull. Izuku, Kaminari, and Tokoyami regrouped with their gang, and they made their way to leave the grounds. All right, so Toru said we were going out to eat. Where are we going? Nothing fancy, I say. She turned around and walked backward, facing them. I bid you all a good time. Tokoyami started, but Mina cut him off before he could leave. Nah, budbo. You're part of the gang now, and that means coming to eat with us and tomfool around. Tokoyami looked at the others, and they gave their agreed with her statement. Dark Shadow popped out and nudged encouragement. If you will have me, very well. He smiled. I say McDonald's, Kaminari proposed. That's not how you pronounced it. Tokoyami looked confused at the word. But you know what I mean, so it works. The blonde shot finger guns at him. You think I can sell this? Izuku fingered the gold medal. That's a good point. What do you think it's worth? Zero looked curious at the thought. You can't sell it. Jairu protested. I mean, it's not real gold, too light. Izuku pondered as he tested the weight. Then he bit it. Don't do that. You'll hurt your teeth. Toru pulled his hand, gripping the medal in his teeth. Fumi. This group seems fun. Let's stick around. Dark Shadow said with enthusiasm. Tokoyami could agree that they all seemed to have fun together. I do not see why not. He responded to his companion. Chapter 16. Image. The gang exited the UA gates and made their way to the nearest fast food restaurant. I think some McDonald's is good. What do you all think? Mina asked the group. That sounds good to me. I haven't had Mickey D's in a while. Jairu pulled her phone out and began to type. That reminds me to tell Mom and Dad I'm going out. That's a good point. Zero did the same and the rest of them followed suit. Toru was the first to notice that Izuku didn't pull his phone out like the rest did. Her face creased in concern. Mina was quick with her phone and glanced around and saw the same thing. She furrowed her brows and asked, "You're not gonna tell your parents?" The gang looked over to see who Mina was talking to. "It's fine." Izuku shrugged non-committally. The gang made various faces of concern at their leader, but no one pushed the subject. They walked through the door of the restaurant and began to order their food. Once done, they sat together at a table. Kaminari held up his shake in a toast. He cleared his throat. "To the winner of the sports festival. Cheers!" The more lively people in the group tapped their drinks with Kaminari's. Izuku felt embarrassed at the moment, but nice that they would cheer his accomplishments. "You all did well too. The showing you gave would have gotten you recognized." Izuku threw back the compliment. "Thanks, boss. So, how did you come out with your stores?" Shiro asked while everyone dug into their meals. Izuku thought for a moment and focused inward. "Mostly good. I got a bit more thermal than before. Kinetic gained. Light lost, but that's no issue. Electricity is low, and sound is way up. That is a great place for sound energy." Jairu nodded in agreement. "Any ideas for electric energy?" Kaminari asked. "There's only so much I can give you daily that I won't need." "Ima checked the weather," Mina said with a smile. The gang snorted and Tokoyami looked confused. Toru looked at Jairu with a raised eyebrow. "I know Tokoyami didn't know, but how do you?" She spoke to Jairu. Her ears turned a bit red. "It's been an instinct to eavesdrop on a convention when someone shouts you did what. I don't spread what anyone says unless it's illegal stuff, but I've heard some great conversations. You all guys at the cafeteria did the same and I listened in, sorry." She sheepishly apologized. "It's fine. It wasn't like a secret or something." Izuku waved it away. "So what was it?" Dark Shadow asked with a fry between their hands. "Our illustrious leader here didn't have enough electrical energy for the exam. So on one stormy night, he decided to stand under the lightning storm and get stuck by the lightning multiple times." Mina pulled the news article from that day and showed it to Tokoyami. "Incredible when you decide to perform this again. I wish to be a witness." Tokoyami looked awestruck and Dark Shadow nodded in agreement with his companion. "Yes, we'll make it a group activity. Sadly, no lightning storms anytime soon." Mina deflated at the end. "I'm thinking about visiting that handsome girl in the support course. Maybe she can make a stationary generator or even give me new energies to try." Izuku shrugged and bit into his burger. They finished their food and headed to the park near the woods they trained at. Toru linked arms with Izuku and they walked in a group talking about the festival. Even if some didn't get to place in the tournament, they all had some fun with it. They arrived at the park and found an empty spot to digest their food. "I mean, Midoriya could have wiped the floor against all of us," Shiro pointed out. "That's not true. I have my weaknesses. I just do my best to counter them." Izuku knew he was strong, but he knew what could beat him if he wasn't careful. "Like what?" Jairu asked unconvinced. "I'm not going to tell you, you can figure it out. It's really simple." Izuku crossed his arms and smiled at them. "Of course, you are lactose intolerant," Kaminari said sagely. "No, you dollar store battery. His weakness is our invisible girl." Mina smirked at the two linked arms. Only one was visible, but it wasn't hard to tell. Izuku blushed and Toru tightened her grip on his arm while glaring at the pink girl without much effect. The group laughed at his reaction and Shiro gave them a lifeline. "So, what's your weakness?" With still pink ears, he answered. "Capturing me in any way. Like that guy in 1B who can make the ground soften, he could trap me. Granted, I could burn or blast my way out, but without energy I'm average." Jairu nodded in understanding. "That makes sense. You still would have plans to get out anyway if that ever happened." "Of course I do. Only a half dozen, but one should work." Oh, that entrance to the last match was awesome. It was a top-tier hero landing." Kaminari changed the topic without any tact. "Yes, that looked awesome. They replayed it on the big screen while Bakugo arrived, and it looked choreographed." Mina got up on the bench and tried to mimic him. "I already have a hero entrance," Shiro boasted. "Show us," Kaminari ordered. Shiro got up on the bench, but Izuku stopped them. "Let's go into the woods if you want to try your quirk out." The group agreed and Tokoyami followed into the woods. "Doesn't this remind you of that manga we read?" Dark Shadow asked Tokoyami. Jairu snorted and turned to the two. I asked the same thing when they brought me here. So no dark rituals? Dark Shadow asked morosely. I'm sure we can make one up if you want. Mina waved her arms like a witch casting a spell. The gang sat near a tree that had a branch they could climb easily for their demonstration. All right, here I go, Zero announced. He swung on a tape ribbon and rolled to a stop. How was that? The group clapped politely. That was great. Very on point, although no catchphrase. Izuku complimented. Nah, I'll say whatever comes to mind at the time. Saying the same thing over and over seems very dull to me. I'm next. Mina got up and ran behind the group. They heard running, then the sound of acid on the ground. She came in sliding on acid and ran up with a smile. I still got to think of a catchphrase or something. They clapped again. It was very cutesy if that was your aim, Jairu said. Toru got up next and ran behind. Everyone faces forward. They heard some clothes ruffling, and then they saw a quick flash of light in the shape of a girl. I see you. Can you see me? She said seriously. Oh ho, that was badass. Mina clapped and the rest followed with her blushing for only Izuku to see, and he gave her an encouraging smile.
Tokoyami des.
You're up, Kaminari said, pointing at the two. Tokoyami looked unsure, but Dark Shadow looked excited. Come on, Fumi, the Quirk encouraged. The bird-headed boy agreed, apprehensive in every step. They heard a thump and Tokoyami landed in a crouch with Dark Shadow roiling behind him. The dark comes to take you back where you came from. Just imagine that we had our costume on with the cloak. Dark Shadow added. The group clapped hard at that demonstration. That was one of the best ones, Zero said. Tokoyami got up and looked sheepish, but the fluffed feathers gave his embarrassment away. We practiced that a lot. Another one is us emerging from an alleyway in the same fashion. Dark Shadow boasted for the two of them. I thank you all for your input. He bowed to them all. Jairu. Mina pointed at her and she shook her head. I don't have anything. She tried to say, make something up. Come on. Toru encouraged. All right. Jairu jogged to the tree and climbed to the branch. She leapt off and landed with her earlobes getting plugged into the ground and releasing a sound wave through the ground. Let the bass drop, she said with a red face. I liked that. And the sound wave was an awesome addition. Kaminari clapped the loudest. The catchphrase was good too, Mina encouraged. Jairu got up with red cheeks and a smile. Thanks. Alright, Sparky is next. The best for last. Midoriya sits in front just in case I lose too much. Kaminari climbed the tree branch and Izuku sat in front of everyone ready to absorb any electricity coming at him. They heard some footsteps on the branch then. Oh shit! Kaminari fell out of the tree and bodily hit the ground with sparks arcing around him. He moaned face down as the gang exploded in laughter at their friend. Izuku moved forward to check on his friend but couldn't contain his laughter. Kaminari, you okay? He said between breaths. My pride. He moaned out. The friends laughed harder at that, and Kaminari joined in shortly after because of the situation he saw. Izuku was being leaned on by Toru, who was wheezing in breaths, and Izuku was trying to control himself but failed. Zero was on his side almost crying. Mina was on her knees clutching her stomach with tears coming out of her eyes while laughing. Jairu held her face as her shoulders shook and Tokoyami covered his mouth hole looking away. Dark Shadow didn't hold back and laughed the hardest. After they all calmed down, they saw the sun begin to set, and they decided to head home. They split off at the train station after getting Tokoyami in their group chat and Toru giving Izuku his hug. Izuku headed to the apartment with a smile and a gold medal in his pocket. The weekend after the sports festival flew by with Izuku doing some light training and some more heavy quirk training. He wanted to do more with his quirk, but as far as he could tell, all his quirk did was take in and release. He could control how much he could take in or how much to release, but that was his limit. It was a simple quirk with complicated factors. He also tried to merge energies like sound and thermal, but the only useful combination was thermal and electric to make plasma, and then kinetic and thermal to blast fire like a fireball. The weekend passed and Izuku headed to UA again for classes to begin. He got many looks while riding the train from other passengers. He did his best to ignore them. The walk to school was quiet and made it to his class without issue. His friends greeted him and he talked for a bit until Aizawa walked into the class. "Welcome back. Hope you had a good weekend because I didn't," he complained at the podium. "Moving on, the reason we have the sports festival is to get you all real-life experience by getting internships sent by heroes who saw your performance. Here are your invitations." He showed a projection with everyone's invitations. He called Ida and Yairuzo to hand out everyone's offers. Todoroki was on top with almost 5,000 offers. Next was Bakugo at 2,000 and then Izuku at 1,000. The rest got lower than 1,000. Kaminari got 400 to his surprise. "Why is Midoriya at third and Todoroki at first?" Kirishima asked with his offers in hand. Todoroki was about to explain, but Izuku beat him to it. "Because of his connection to the number 2 hero. And I didn't help my image with the last match." Todoroki nodded in agreement. Izuku was flipping through his thick stack, quietly analyzing each name he could recognize. He stopped at the name of Endeavor on the second page. With a raised eyebrow, he turned to Todoroki. "Your father gave me an offer," he said with a questioning brow. Todoroki scrunched his nose slightly. "Me too." That's all he said. Izuku wasn't sure if Todoroki has started to use his fire or not, but Izuku did his best, so he did. If he didn't, then he shouldn't be a hero. Endeavor reminds Izuku a lot of Bakugo, but he is supposed to go to get experience, and who else to learn from than the number 2? He will milk this opportunity as much as he can. After all, he can't get full in thermal energy anyways. He circled Endeavor as the top possibility and continued to search. One more thing, hero code names. "I'm not creative, so she is doing it." Aizawa rolled into his sleeping bag and Midnight slammed the door open and strolled in. "That's right. And you better choose wisely or else it will stick." She jabbed a thumb at the napping form of their homeroom teacher and got a few chuckles out of it. She handed out whiteboards and they began to brainstorm for ideas. Izuku just thought of his quirk and what it did. He wanted a short name he could recognize. He capped his marker and set his whiteboard face down with his name. Kaminari turned around to show Izuku his. "Too much of a mouthful?" Izuku said it slowly like he was tasting the word. "Charge Bolt, no, I think it's good." Toru erased the name and leaned back. She looked around and spotted Izuku flipping through his internship offers. She caught Bakugo in the corner of her eye sitting quietly, and she made a face at him with no one knowing. She turned back to Izuku and he was covering his mouth and staring straight at her. Her face bloomed in heat at being caught. She grabbed her whiteboard and snuck over to him. Izuku snorted just a bit as she arrived at his side. "Stop it," she whispered, yelled at him. "I'm sorry, just..." His shoulders shook a bit and he covered his mouth. "How many times have you done that?" "More than once," she giggled and then got to the matter at hand. "I need help with my name." "All right, what kind of name do you want? Something short or to have some meaning?" he asked. "Show me yours, maybe I'll get an idea." She tried to peek at his whiteboards, but Izuku held it down. "You'll see it with everyone. Plus, it's not all that." She pulled her hand back and pouted. "Fine then." She did smile when she caught his blush when he looked at her face. "You going to flirt all class?" Jairu leaned back and whispered into her ear. Laughed when she was batted away by Turu's hands. Shiro heard it all since he was right next to Izuku and behind Jairu. He turned to Izuku to see his reaction and was satisfied when he had red ears. He turned to Shiro and he moved his eyebrows suggestively. Izuku blushed only more at his insinuation. Turu slapped his arm when she caught the action and turned to Izuku. "So, will you help me?" Turu asked the flustered boy. He cleared his throat and nodded with a smile. "Of course, I'll help you." "All right, who wants to go first?" Midnight clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. Aoyama walked first to present his long hero name. It was rejected and he sat back down to work on it. Kaminari was next with his name of Charge Bolt proudly presented. Name after name went up with Bakugo's name getting rejected and Mina's as well. Turu went up and turned hers around to show the name. Prisms. "That's a good one, approved," Midnight said, and Turu beamed at Izuku. As people went up and presented their names, Mina scurried over to their gang leader. "Midori, help," she whined. "Are you sure?" She looked at him with narrowed eyes. "You help Turu? Or is she different to you than I am to you?" She had a devious smile on her face, and it grew as his face grew hot once again. Izuku didn't know what to say and Kaminari saved him by shocking her arm. "Leave him be, you don't want to ruin it." He whispered the last part in her ear. Mina nodded in agreement. "Sorry, Midoriya. Got any ideas?" Izuku got himself under control and pushed the thoughts plaguing his mind for later. "A few ideas if you want." Mina walked to the podium and presented her whiteboard. "Acid Queen." She smiled. Izuku walked to the podium and showed what he had chosen. "Flux? It suits you well, approved." Midnight nodded with less enthusiasm than the others. He had left a lasting image when she had to watch him break Bakugo until he gave up. The day progressed as normal with everyone looking through their internship offers. At lunch, everyone ate more or less quietly while they flipped through their packets or a few leaves of paper. Izuku finished eating and got up to head to the support department. The gang offered to join, but Izuku turned them down. They came anyways after quickly eating. They arrived at the support department and there was a plume of black smoke coming out of the open door. Izuku knocked at the doorframe as Power Loader tried to smother a flame that wouldn't go out. "What is this? Hatsum? Is this thermite?" He was yelling at the pink-haired girl with goggles on her eyes and writing frantically on a clipboard. Izuku walked up and absorbed the thermal energy until it was smothered. Power Loader stared at the black stain on the still intact metal table. "What were you thinking of lighting thermite inside the workshop?" He turned to Hatsum, who stopped writing and stared at the previous burning spot. "You shouldn't be able to put that out. How'd you do it?" She zipped over and got too close for Izuku's comfort. "Ow!" She was zapped on her lip when she didn't back off. "Don't crowd me. I came to ask about getting something built." Izuku stepped away from the excitable girl while Toru glared at her. Mina and Jairu waved in greeting. "Build? What do you need?" "Hatsum Industries will make sure it's built better than anyone could." Hatsum got in Izuku's space again and she was zapped harder. "Stop that. Stop getting so close to me." Izuku shrugged non-committally and looked to Power Loader. "Watch a need." The hero pulled Hatsum away from the rumored unstable boy. "Something that generates a large amount of electricity. Something stationary is fine. I don't want to lug it around." Izuku asked. "Also, do you have any other energies I could?" He paused to search for words. "Taste." The gang snorted at his description. "Taste? Explain to me what you need it all for." Hatsum was also listening carefully. Izuku explained his quirk and Hatsum ran off with wide eyes. "That makes sense. Where else could you get electricity without a dedicated source?" He nodded. As for others, he was cut off by Hatsum running up to him and putting something in Izuku's hands. Izuku took the metal tube and switched to his sixth sense. He felt energy shooting off of it and he grabbed some and took it into his core. He felt the new energy settle into its new home. He looked up just as Power Loader asked the question. "What's this?" He held out the metal tube. Power Loader flinched away and shouted, "That's concentrated nuclear isotopes. Put it down gently." He didn't get closer. "Oh fuck!" Izuku quickly stepped away from his friends and absorbed all the energy contained in the container. He turned on his sixth sense and nothing was left except the container. He turned a glare at the pink-haired girl. "It would have been nice to know what you gave me. You absorbed it, didn't you? So it's fine, gimme." She took the container and unscrewed the top. A metal rod slipped out into her gloved hands as she examined it. "Hatsum May, put that down this instant." Hearing the tone of voice of her teacher, she listened without arguing. Power Loader dug a device out of a cabinet and passed it over the rod, and then Izuku. It never went off. "You won't find any radiation. I absorbed all the energy once I found out what it was." The hero set the device aside and took Izuku's hand where he held the container. The boy held himself from pulling away and let the teacher examine for any abnormalities. He hesitated and grabbed the device. Released a drop of it. "Aim down." Izuku did so and the device crackled loudly and then died down. "That answers if you can absorb nuclear," Kaminari said from behind. He was hit quickly. All right. No joking, that's incredible." Power Loader mumbled to himself as Hatsum picked up the rod and began to test it in various ways. "Izuku, you feel all right?" Toru tapped his arm. He looked at her and saw her concern. "I feel fine." He smiled for her comfort. Although, I think I have a cancer ray now. Izuku felt the newest energy in his core nuclear. Oh, let's hit Bakugo with it. Mina said evilly. She was bopped between the horns. Ow! Fake tears cropped up as she looked at Izuku. No giving cancer to people, maybe. That will be Plan C. Kaminari nodded and Tokoyami looked concerned at what they were saying. Jairu nodded her head as the new development cropped up. She wonders if she could make a song out of it. Chapter 17 Thermal. Power Loader scanned Izuku up and down to make sure he didn't leak any nuclear energy. He drew some blood and tested it, but nothing came from the results. Looks like you're clear. Let me know if you have any issues. Izuku furrowed his brow in slight anger. Yes. I'll let you know if your student gave me poisoning of some kind. While he was glad he had another energy to play with, he didn't like the risk of exposure to cancerous materials. Granted, he is practically immune to it, but before, not so much. Izuku headed out of the room and to the gates of the school. He looked at his phone and read the messages from his friends. They all split to head to their homes and would see him tomorrow. He smiled at the cutesy emoji Toru sent him at the end. He didn't have any plans for the day, so he got to the apartment and saw he had a package for himself. It was his Quirk clothes. He tore the box open and checked his new clothes out. It was 2 sets of clothes. Shorts, shirts, and 1 pair of thin shoes he kept with the black color. He put them on and headed out to experiment with the newest energy in his core. He wasn't exactly sure what nuclear energy could do, but he will have to be careful with how much he uses. While the isotope contained a large amount of energy, it would be harder to obtain than any other. He sat at the clearing and focused on the nuclear energy. He looked around and felt none. It was to be expected. Next, he released a small amount on some leaves, both to see the effect of nuclear energy on living matter and to see how the energy moves. The leaves didn't move, but the green color drained slightly. As for the energy itself, it was erratic, more so than electricity. Electricity wanted to go anywhere with the lowest negative charge or the path of least resistance. Nuclear energy shot out in any direction it could, as the light energy did. While his release was focused, the edges leaked energy. He absorbed the lingering energy and hummed to himself in thought. Using pure nuclear energy offensively would be bad. But maybe combining it with another might show some results, the safest ones first. Light, sound, kinetic, and electricity didn't combine well. Lighting was the only one to show a difference, with the electricity changing color to a bluish hue. The burn marks on the tree didn't show any difference, and he didn't have instruments to measure its power. Thermal, on the other hand, showed incredible results. The basic flames mixed with the nuclear energy and burned hotter than would be safe. It wasn't normal flames anymore, but a nuclear fire. He shot it at a tree and the air screamed as it boiled. It was closer to a laser beam as the part of the trunk was turned to ash in a moment. The tree fell and Izuku absorbed the flames that lingered on the trunk. He got more thermal energy than he released just from those flames alone. The ambient thermal energy also was high from the released energy. Super lethal, noted, Izuku said to himself. He looked at the fell tree and shrugged. More energy couldn't hurt. It turned to ash the next minute. The rest of the week passed without much to speak about. Everyone handed in their internship paperwork and the class met up at the train station to split off. 1A all had their suitcases as Aizawa spoke. Don't cause trouble, now be gone. He left with that. Izuku's gang said their goodbyes and Toru gave him a hug that lingered longer than usual. The rest gang elbowed each other with smirks. I'll see you later, Izuku. She smiled at him and headed to her train. Izuku followed Todoroki to another train and boarded it. He sat across from him and put his headphones on. The elemental boy didn't try to speak to Izuku as they rode on silence. He wondered how his time in the number 2 Heroes Agency will go. He is aware of the multiple heroes and sidekicks Endeavor employed, and Izuku was excited to see if he could absorb any new energies he came across. They arrived at their stop and they walked off. Todoroki didn't wait for Izuku to catch up and headed to Endeavor's agency like he had been there before, which isn't hard to believe. Many heroes walked in and put as they arrived. Todoroki walked up to the receptionist and she gave him a card. Izuku walked up to the woman and she crossed his name off a list. She handed him the same card for the elevator and Izuku went to follow Todoroki again. They walked out of the elevator and to a set of double doors with flame motifs on them. Izuku huffed in amusement at the unoriginal design. Endeavor stood waiting behind the doors with crossed arms. Izuku raised an eyebrow at the dramatic show. You finally arrived, good. Go change into your hero suits and meet me in the gym. Shoto, show him. With that, he left through the doors. Shoto let out a small sigh of announced and began to walk down the hallway. This way, they arrived in a large locker room with lockers lining the wall and benches on the other side. Shoto went to an empty locker and began to change. Izuku took an empty one and did the same. Once he put on his tank top, he grabbed his jacket and put it on. He smelled a lingering perfume from Toru. Izuku smiled and the tips of his ears felt hot at the moment. The two trainees walked into a private gym with Endeavor and Burnin waiting. So this is the winner, huh? You don't seem all that. Burnin began as she examined Izuku. Izuku did the same to her, but there was no need as he already read the profile he has on her. Burnin or Mo Kamiji, age 25, a graduate of Shiketsu High School in the high middle of her class. Applied to Endeavor's agency 6 times until hired on the 7th at a low position and worked your way up to Endeavor's 2nd in 5 years. Quirk is blazing hair, which allows the user to manipulate the fire pulled from the flaming hair to various forms. Usually positive personality with a very enthusiastic attitude for everything. Did I miss anything? Her smile waned as she stepped back slightly. How do you know all that? What freaked her out the most was how he knew about the 6 denied applications. I like to have information, Izuku said and turned to Endeavor. On everyone I can. That's a good trait to have. Explain your quirk to me. Endeavor commanded. I absorb energies, store them, and release them. He explained simply. What kinds of energies? Endeavor looked intriguing now. Thermal, kinetic, electric, sound, light, and now nuclear. Everyone snapped their heads to the last one. Nuclear, Burnin asked. I can absorb any energy as long as I've come in contact with it. A support department student gave me a contained nuclear isotope in her excitement about the experiment. What is your limit on the quantity and different amounts of energy you can store? Endeavor continues his questions. None as far as I can tell. He shrugged. Impossible. There has to be a limit on both. Endeavor scoffed. Test me then. Throw everything you have and I'll take it all. Izuku baited. He stared at Izuku for a moment and then, very well. You two go to the viewing room. Burnin looked somewhat apprehensive. Don't go too hard on the kid, she joked. They walked to a door and walked through it and to a thick treated glass window to watch. You know Midoriya better than me. How do you think he'll do? Shoto stared out the glass at Izuku, who was neatly folding his jacket and setting it to the side. He is strong, but I don't know if what he said was the truth. With the last word spoken, the room turned into a hellscape. Endeavor stared at the calm boy across from him. Say yield when you cannot continue. He prepared a simple blast of flames. You do the same. Izuku goat. The flames on the hero's hands grew hotter and blasted toward him. Before the flames got halfway to him, they were condensed into streams of fire and absorbed into Izuku's body. He hadn't moved from his position. The next blast came without hesitation, but the same result happened. The room began to get hotter and hotter as Endeavor poured heavier attacks at Izuku. He began to run around Izuku as he blasted superheated fire at the boy, but he still didn't move or counterattack. That irked Endeavor and began to use super moves on him, but the flame constructs fell apart as they got close to the calm boy. Izuku's core continued to absorb the thermal energy Endeavor was freely giving away. Before, if he released all the thermal energy at once, he could turn the building and some of the surroundings into slag. Now, maybe a block radius more. He could see Endeavor begin to get annoyed at his still position. Will you stand there or do something? Endeavor growled. Okay, I fight back. The room began to drain of heat and frost spread from Izuku's feet. Where he stood was now a small crater as Izuku was launched straight to Endeavor. The veteran hero saw it coming and threw a flaming punch at the boy. His fist collided with Izuku's shoulder and came to a dead stop as if it was gently placed there. The flames on his fist wavered and snuffed out as they streamed into Izuku. The raised fist that Izuku had pulled back hit Endeavor in the face, but the true damage was from the kinetic blast afterwards. Izuku poured about 3 times what Endeavor would have hit Izuku with and threw it back in his face. Something cracked and Endeavor was thrown back. The hero reeled back and felt something in his mouth. He spat it out and saw the white enamel of his molar with his blood. In a rage, he released a large amount of fire from his body that normally would have melted the stone in the specialized room, but the flames never reached anywhere other than where he stood. The rest were sucked into Izuku's body where he walked to the raging hero. Endeavor began to feel cold instead of the ever-present heat in his body. He saw why. The room was filled with frost instead of sweltering heat. The only spot where there wasn't frost was under Endeavor's feet, but it was getting closer by the second. The hero began to feel the beginning of Quirk exhaustion. Izuku was pulling more thermal energy from the hero's body by force. Izuku raised his hand and aimed it at Endeavor's chest, and then looked at the number 2 hero and waited. A small bead of blinding light was contained in his hand and it radiated heat. Izuku tilted his head as if to ask a question but never spoke. Endeavor stared at the boy with enough raw power to beat the number 2 hero without breaking a sweat. He was sure if he gave enough reason the boy would fire whatever he had contained in his hand. That is enough for today. Have Burnin show you the building. Shoto, begin your regime. Izuku closes his hand and the bead of pure thermal energy was absorbed back into his core. In the viewing room, Shoto stared at the boy who beat the number 2 hero with ease. Burnin had a smile, but underneath she was slightly pale. Normally she would be pumped up at the power Midoriya showed, but the look in his eye, as he waited for Endeavor to end the spar, was spine-chilling. On top of his last match against Bakugo in the sports festival showed something darker in the boy's mind. Izuku shook his jacket to get rid of the frost clinging to it. He put it back on and looked at the aftermath of his bout with Endeavor. The concrete was warped from the intense heat and then absolute cold. Shoto gave him a nod and split off from Burnin, who walked out of a door that led to stairs. Burnin had a strained smile when she met up with him. Now that was a match to remember. She tried to slap his shoulder, but it stopped dead as soon as it touched him, which unnerved her even more. Come on, let's give you the prime tour. Izuku nodded and followed her. He observed her hair flickering like normal flames. He wondered what would happen if he absorbed the flames from her quirk. Would she go into quirk exhaustion and then to death if he continued to pull? It was a dark thought, but his curiosity was definitely piqued. They walked through the large building with Burnin stopping every once in a while to show Izuku a room or area. She showed him the communications room, weight room, Izuku's and Shoto's rooms for the week, and finally the cafeteria. It was a large room that covered most of the 5th floor. Over a dozen heroes sat and ate or chatted with each other. Izuku recognized many of them, but the rest were too new to the game to have information about them. The two began to walk to the line for some food, but one hero called out and Burnin cursed softly under her breath. What's up, second? Showing the newbie around? What's his deal? A cocky male hero with a skin-tight blue and red suit began to speak. Izuku observed him for a second and already knew Izuku wouldn't like him. The smirk on his face aimed at Burnin and him just made it more punchable. Burnin seemed to think the same. Yes, Flamebar. This is... Actually, I never got your hero name? She turned to Izuku. My name is Izuku Midoriya. Hero name, Flux. He introduced himself to Flamebar. Flux is a classmate of Shoto that came to intern with Endeavor. Flux? That's a pretty weird name. He snorted with derision. Ain't you the same brat that won the sports festival? Yeah, you beat that last kid until he gave up. That's pretty villainous. He leaned forward in an attempt to intimidate Izuku. Izuku stared blankly at him. Then do something about it. You're a hero, you're supposed to stop any villainous behavior. Or are you one of those heroes that are in for it for the fame and glory? He stared at Flamebar's angering eyes. Maybe you should. And while I'm at it, beat some respect into you. He rose and grabbed Izuku by his jacket collar. Izuku noticed Burnin wasn't doing anything. Fine, he'll deal with it. Izuku gripped the hero's hand and began to absorb kinetic energy. After all, the body is kept moving by kinetic energy from the beating heart to the flowing blood. So Izuku began to slowly absorb what little kinetic energy there was naturally in the body. Flamebar eyes began to flutter and breathing slowed. What are you doing to me? He slurred out. Let go of my jacket, he ordered. Instead of listening, Flame Bar activated his quirk, and flames from his shoulders began to spread to his hands. They stopped at his elbows and turned into streams of thermal energy. He tried to punch Izuku with his other hand, but it landed without impact on his face. Finally, he let go of his jacket and Izuku gripped him harder. "You seem tired. Sit down." He moved so Flame Bar fell back into his seat while Izuku kept his grip on his hands. With a nod, he let go of his hands and Flame Bar gasped for breath. His heart began to beat normally and blood flowed how it should. What the hell was that? He gasped for breath while still trying to ignite his arms. Every time they did, they turned into streams of thermal energy that got sucked into Izuku's body. "Don't touch me next time." Izuku turned to leave and was met by Burnen's furrowed brow. "We don't use our quirks unless it's necessary," she said sternly. "Endeavor doesn't seem to care for that rule with his flame beard. And you didn't seem to care for my little interaction with Flame Bar," Izuku said without much care for her anger toward him. "That's how it goes around here. You're the new guy and someone hazes you." She argued back and didn't even try to argue for Endeavor's blatant quirk use. He tried and failed. Anything else? When she didn't respond, he moved past her to get in line for some food. He noticed then that the whole cafeteria was quiet as they stared at him. A small few gave nods of approval, but most watched him. He was fine with that and ignored the ones who had furrowed brows aimed at him. The line began to move again and Izuku got his plate of food. It tasted all right. Burnen sat across from him but didn't speak again. Once finished, he waited for her to finish eating and then spoke. "Who do I talk to about hand-to-hand combat?" That's one thing he couldn't learn on his own. She looked up at him and then jerked her head in the direction of a woman with a tight hair bun and a serious expression. "She's the best hand combative hero here, but she won't teach anyone." Izuku got up and went to talk to her. "I am Flux, an intern here for the week. Will you teach me hand-to-hand?" "No," she said curtly. "Who is the second best after you then?" "Endeavor." With a nod, he turned to head to the elevator. But she stopped him by raising her hand. "You won't try to convince me to train you?" "No, it would be a waste of time. If you wanted to train someone, you would have." He turned back and walked to the elevator to ask Endeavor for hand-to-hand training. Chapter 18. Patrol. Izuku didn't wait for Burnen to follow as he pushed the button for the top floor where Endeavor's office was. Arriving, he saw it was empty, so he returned to the elevator and went down to the gym. He found Endeavor sparring with Shoto, and by the looks of it, it was brutal. Shoto did his best to fight back against his father, but the veteran hero didn't give any ground. Izuku stood to the side and waited for their fight to finish. He saw many martial arts put to use. He recognized some, but he didn't have practice in the arts. Finally, Endeavor knocked Shoto down and he lay there for a moment. Endeavor turned to Izuku. "What is it you want?" "Training in hand-to-hand fighting." "Where is Burnen?" He furrowed his brow. "I left her in the cafeteria. She pointed me to another, but she refused to train me. So I came to you for training." "What training have you had before?" "None. I wasn't allowed in training classes." Izuku wasn't going to hide his previous status anymore. If they scorned him, he would deal with it one way or another. It gave no benefit for hiding it, and revealing it will allow him to see what kind of person he is speaking with. "Why is that?" Endeavor did read Izuku's profile, which contained what had happened in the USJ and his resulting psychological evaluation request. His admittance of not being allowed into a training center made him think of his rumored, unstable nature. Not to mention his last showing at the sports festival. "Quirkless aren't allowed in them. I am a late bloomer." He saw the younger Todoroki was paying rapt attention to him. "How late?" Endeavor continued. "Last year." He watched Endeavor, and he couldn't read his expression. Shoto, on the other hand, was shocked. "And you've managed to control your quirk in this short of time. Incredible." He said it more to himself than Izuku. "Shoto, take a break. I wish to see what Flux has in him." He dismissed his son without looking. The rest of the day was grueling for Izuku. His previous training helped him keep up to a point, but he didn't have any formal training in anything. Endeavor didn't hold back as he threw Izuku left and right. Thankfully, Izuku could absorb the impacts, but his muscles will still be sore the next day. After a shower, he walked into the room set for him and Shoto. The other boy was already on his bed reading as Izuku came in with a damp towel on his head. He sat and checked his phone for the group chat. Everyone seems to be having fun with their internship with pictures sent through the app. He smiled to himself as he saw Turu's selfie with her interned hero. He was brought out of his thoughts by Shoto speaking. What was it like growing up quirkless? Izuku looked up and saw the curiosity. Hell, the scars I have are from others using their quirks on me because if I reported them, they could get away with it. From teachers to police, they didn't care for a quirkless person, a fourth-rate citizen. Grades were marked lower to make the quirked look better than me. You can imagine the rest. Fourth-rate citizen? I thought the expression was second-rate citizen? I was at the bottom. You were on the top. If you wanted to go out there and study to be whatever you wanted, you could. I would have been rejected because what's better, someone with the same grades but one had a quirk. Who do you think they'll choose? Izuku held no scorn for Shoto's better life compared to his, but he wanted to use it as an example. He scowled slightly. My life wasn't as good as you think. I wasn't talking about your home life. I was talking about how you could go out without anyone batting an eye at you. I don't know what your home life was like, but outside you could walk the streets without a kid your age jumping on you and the police looking the other way. Oh, Shoto realized immediately after. Was your home better? I was never hurt, he said simply. Shoto was quiet for a moment and then spoke. He explained about his father setting up a Quirk marriage with his mother's family for the money. How his mother poured boiling water on his face and how his father trained him to the bone to surpass All Might. Izuku snorted and Shoto shot a questioning brow at him. You don't like All Might, why? Shoto asked. He saved me from a villain and then he shot my idea of being a hero like a dying dog. Not once did he ever apologize or speak about it again. All he does is glare at me for making it or maybe thinking I hid my quirk or something. He shrugged and huffed a laugh. That was the same day I got my quirk too. Shoto took all that in and sat in silence. I guess we both have pretty bad luck with life. You still have a sister and brother you can connect with, I say try to. You still have family. Have you ever visited your mother? He felt a pang of loneliness from mentioning family, but he ruthlessly shoved it down. I did. I didn't know how she would react when she saw me. She was happy to see me, it was nice. As for my siblings, how? He had a faint smile thinking of his mother. Talk to them. Izuku shrugged. You have some experience compared to me with that. I'll think about it. Midoriya, yeah, thank you for getting me to use my fire. Happy to be able to help someone. Izuku lay down to get some sleep. The next came without much fanfare. Izuku woke at the same time Shoto did and got ready for his daily routine. Izuku went to the gym that Burnin showed him and began his warm-ups and moved to a treadmill. Some other heroes joined him in the gym, but Izuku ignored them all. At one point, Endeavor walked into the gym to look for his other intern. He stepped in front of the treadmill and Izuku took off his earbuds. Izuku kept his running pace as he spoke. Yes, once you finish, meet me on floor 8 to continue your hand-to-hand training. With that, he left. The Absorber sped up his pace to begin the end of the routine and go meet the number 2 hero. Endeavor finished up with Shoto and turned to Izuku. He got in the stance Endeavor showed him yesterday and he nodded in approval. For 3 hours, Izuku learned how to properly fight with his body. His body ached, but he soaked everything Endeavor threw at him. That's enough for now, go get cleaned up. You have an hour and a half and then we go on a patrol. Endeavor commanded. Izuku nodded and jogged off to the showers to get changed into his hero suit. He went to the cafeteria and got a meal so he could focus properly. He took a food bar and put it in his pouch where his ball bearing was for later. He still hadn't had a chance to use them against anyone. The Nomu at the USJ would have been useless, but Shigaraki and Kurogiri would have been a different story. He finished his meal and went back to the elevator to Endeavor's office to wait to head out. Shoto was there already waiting with Burnin and a few other of Endeavor's sidekicks. The number 2 hero was mapping out a route for them with the pro heroes around him. Once done, Endeavor led them to the ground floor and out in the streets. Endeavor began to walk in a direction with everyone following him. Burnin began to explain what in particular they should keep an eye out for, how they should hold themselves. It was a bit hard for her to get the 2 serious boys to smile for the people, but it only led to failure on her part. We split off here, Shoto with me. Flux, go with Burnin and follow her directions. Endeavor led Shoto off in the opposite direction at an intersection. Flux and Burnin began to patrol the route Endeavor gave them. It was quiet as people walked around on their business and a few waved at them. So tell me, why are you always so angry looking? Or is that just your face? She laughed to break the ice. Do you really want to know, or are you just trying to make small talk? Izuku asked with his head in a swivel. His sixth sense was turned on for everything, but nothing came of it. I have some idea how Shoto was trained and why he is the way he is. But you are different. I'm just curious. She smiled and waved at a kid with his mother. What do you know of how quirkless people are treated? Izuku began. She furrowed her brows. Bad and getting worse. Last time I saw the statistics. Why? I just got my quirk last year, and yes, it was bad, to say the least. When I first found out about my quirk, I contemplated wiping my old school off the map with everyone inside. I didn't do that. Instead, I turned in all the evidence to the police, and the next day Aldera was raided and teachers were thrown in jail for what they've done. Izuku said coldly and reminiscent of that day in the library. You went to Aldera? You were the one who gave the information to the news stations and police. You ruined every adult that worked in that school, even if they got out of jail. Burnin saw the boy next to him in a new light. She had read the reports of what caused the raid to start, but never imagined meeting who they were based on or who turned them in. I'm sorry, she said to him. Izuku turned to her and observed her for a moment. He saw earnestness and pity which he ignored. You have nothing to apologize for. He turned back and kept walking on the route. Right? She said softly, and then she smiled. Let's go beat up some bad guys. In an attempt to cheer him up. If we find any, I suppose that's a good sign. Or bad one if they are bidding their time. Now you're getting it, newbie. She clapped his shoulder and the impact was absorbed. Whoa, freaky. Let's go. She marched forward. They walked around the neighborhood with nothing of note happening until they turned a corner and found three men trying to pry a door open on a closed shop with a crowbar. They were too busy arguing among themselves to realize they were spotted. The three of them were nondescript with black masks hiding their facial features. Make sure no civilians are hurt in the crossfire and only use your quirk in defense of someone else. Now watch how the pros do it. She cracked her knuckles and tore two pieces of her hair off and merged them to make a green burning whip. She lashed out and caught the closest one to the street. With a yank, he was thrown back and landed at her feet. With a punch to his forehead, we went unconscious. The other two panicked at seeing a pro but gained confidence when they only saw her alone. You boys shouldn't be doing what you're doing. Why don't you come with me for a chat? She smiled at the two would-be robbers. Izuku put himself between a small crowd that showed up at the commotion and pushed them back when they began to get too close. The crowd grumbled when Izuku did so but listened anyways. The three clashed. One robber used the crowbar and the other began to use his quirk that summoned a golden sword made of light. Burnin dropped the whip and molded a staff to push the two back. Izuku watched carefully as the fight continued. Burnin pushed them back and knocked them down with two finishing blows each. The first guy she knocked out on the other hand. The robber got up from his position of faking and threw three globs of something glowing at Izuku and the crowd. Flux caught two that hit and stuck to Izuku. The third landed on a woman. The quirk didn't do anything other than glowed green with a pulse. The hero in training tried to grab the one on the woman, but it was stuck on her. Stay back, hero, or I detonate them. The man yelled at Burnin. Izuku immediately grabbed the woman and dragged her away from the crowd. He began to look at the bombs and saw nothing other than their shape. Then he switched to his sixth sense and he could feel it. He turned to the woman who was crying and shaking. He ignored the man still talking to Burnin and focused on the bomb on the woman. He got a hold of the energy and yanked it to himself. The green glob turned into a green stream and was drawn into Izuku's body. Go! He pushed her to the crowd and then focused on the ones on his body. He absorbed everything with that energy without hesitation and they disappeared. And just like before, new energy settled in his core. I said stay back. Burnin saw what Flux had done and began to run at him. The would-be robber backed away and snapped his fingers. When nothing happened, he stared dumbly at his fingers, then he whipped his head around to look at the boy who he threw the bombs at. They were gone. The next thing he knew, he was on the ground, and darkness overtook him. The crowd cheered at Burnen's takedown. The whole incident took less than 5 minutes in total. Burnen smiled and waved the crowd and then made her way over to Flux after making sure the 3 robbers were tied together. She put a hand on his shoulder and said, "I couldn't have done it alone. Flux, a first-year UA student, was here to assist me." Police began to push through the crowd and one approached Burnen and Flux. Before the policeman could say anything, Burnen turned to Izuku. "You all right? What were those things he threw?" "Bombs. They were made of energy, so I absorbed them." He raised his palm and a small glob of the same green bomb emerged from his hand. It was fun to have new energies to play with. Too bad he will probably never get a refill of that kind. Burnen nodded with a smile and then turned to the policeman. "Now to teach you about this side of hero work." Burnen greeted the officer and began to tell him what had happened in detail. Izuku paid attention to the whole conversation as the officer took notes and then gave them a nod and went off to finish his work. Then what? Izuku watched the 3 unconscious men get loaded into a van with suppression cuffs on them each. "We continue on our patrol, and once we get back to the agency, we fill out the paperwork for this incident." Thankfully, there was no collateral damage of any sort other than what they caused at the door. Burnen explained, "Come on, let's keep going." Just as Izuku was going to follow, someone called out to him. "Excuse me." Izuku turned to see the woman that was stuck with the bomb. "I wanted to say thank you for what you did. What's your name?" "Flux. Your thanks are appreciated." Izuku nodded and she beamed a smile at him and he turned back to follow Burnen. When they got out of earshot, Burnen spoke up. "She was pretty cute, huh?" She elbowed him and gave him a teasing smirk. Izuku raised an eyebrow at her. "I suppose, why? I mean, I'm just curious to see where your standards are. Or maybe you have someone else in mind." She dangled some bait casually. His mind flashed to Turu's beaming smile instead of that woman's. He smiled unconsciously and Burnen latched onto it. "Oh ho? What's with that smile? Who popped into your mind?" She smiled like a cat that caught a canary. His cheeks turned pink at his being caught. "No one," she kept going with her teasing. "None of that. Come on, tell me." She bumped shoulders with him in an attempt to break him. "Let me guess, that pink girl? No, she is more of a wingman if I'd guess. The one with the earlobes. Shouldn't we be focusing on patrolling?" He tried to change the subject. "Or maybe that invisible girl. She was pretty close to you most of the festival once I watched it again." Izuku gave a minuscule twitch and her smile grew. "It is her. Why are you so interested in this subject?" He tried again to veer off the line of questioning. "It all makes sense to me. You can see energies and with heat vision you can see her." "Oh, how romantic." She swooned. "I wouldn't want to ruin what we have." Izuku finally broke and went along with her conversation. "She is my first friend in 10 years, and I don't want to lose that in an attempt to get more than I'm already grateful for." He didn't yell it, but his words showed enough emotion for the hero to understand. She calmed down from her antics and thought for a moment. "And if she doesn't just want to be friends, then she can make that choice. I don't want to risk anything. Now, when everything has been turning around for me." Burnen heard the vulnerability in his words and let it be. Instead, she patted his shoulder and pointed at a food stand. "I'm hungry. Let's get some food." She smiled. The rest of the patrol continues without any incident as they returned to the agency. Endeavor and Shoto stood in the lobby talking to an office worker. She gave some papers to Endeavor, bowed, and left. He sifted through them and then turned to the 2. "You've returned? Anything of note?" he said to Burnen. "An attempted BNE. Flux stopped a potential hostage situation and that was it." Burnen jabbed a thumb at Izuku to the side. "Hostage situation?" He raised an eyebrow at her. "One used his quirk, some kind of bomb, to threaten me to let him go. Flux caught 2, but the last was attached to a woman. He absorbed its energy and I was able to take down the man," she explained. Izuku raised a finger and showed the energy he had acquired. Pulsed green and then it was sucked back into his hand. Endeavor nodded with a grunt. "Show him what paperwork needs to be filled out. After you're done, meet me in the gym to continue your training." The last he spoke to Izuku, and then he turned to the elevator. Shoto gave Izuku a nod and split off to who knows where. The next day, Izuku woke up sore from the training but didn't complain as he was learning much from the top hero. He had sparred with Shoto but he was outclassed on that front. He followed his normal routine in the morning and then went to the gym. After some training, Endeavor called the UA students to a room with Burnin and some of his sidekicks. Once everyone was in the room, Endeavor spoke. "It's time to go to Hosu. Prepare to leave an hour." "Hosu? Why, sir?" one of the sidekicks asked. "It's time for the hero killer to come to an end," he said with conviction. Chapter 19, Hosu. Izuku and Shoto sat side by side on a train to Hosu with part of Endeavor's agency in the same train car. It was nearing mid-afternoon as they finally reached the train station they would depart on. Izuku slipped on his gas mask that covered the lower part of his face and stretched as he got up to step off the bullet train. Everyone began to split off immediately after leaving the station as they already knew where their routes were. Izuku and Shoto stuck with Endeavor and Burnin. Izuku had read up on Stain a while ago. From what he understands, Stain began to kill or critically injure heroes in a select pattern. He would target 3 or 4 heroes per city and move on to the next city. He had seen the pattern immediately after looking up the victim of Stain. They were heroes who were accused or guilty of some sort of corruption. Whether it be a scandal or being lax in their duty of being a hero, Stain had targeted them for that reason. Ideally, how they should capture Stain is using a hero that fits his parameters and using them as bait, springing a trap. No one knows what his quirk is, but from what Izuku was able to glean, they all died to a bladed weapon with little resistance of the victim. What he didn't know was that Stain's last target was Ingenium, Ida's brother. Izuku never paid attention to anyone in his class other than to assess if they would be a threat in any way, and Ida was the same. Now still was the same, but he paid attention to his friends. He was sure the boy was devastated about what had happened to his brother, but Izuku didn't notice how he was after the sports festival. The 4 continued their patrol of Hosu with minimal activity. Minor issues Endeavor took care of without much trouble while Izuku and Shoto stood back and watched. There were many fans taking pictures as Endeavor walked, but he paid them no mind. Burnin, on the other hand, posed for a few and tried to drag Izuku and Shoto with her, to little success. The longer the day passed, the more Endeavor seemed to get annoyed with the lack of news of Stain. Izuku was sure that they wouldn't cross paths with him for one main reason. "You won't find Stain this way," Izuku stated as they walked. Everyone turned to Izuku and Endeavor furrowed his brows at the intern. "Explain," he demanded. "All of Stain's victims were alone and in alleyways. Not once has he struck when out in the open or when the hero was in a group." Izuku shrugged as if it was obvious. Endeavor thought about what Izuku said and grunted in agreement. "Then how would you try and find him, boy?" "Bait." Burnin spoke before Endeavor did. "That's dark, don't you think?" Izuku shrugged. "Stain always targets heroes with set criteria. They all have been involved with something the hero didn't want to be revealed. Scandals, skimming money from employees, being too aggressive, being too passive, or the like." Shoto and Burnin looked at him weirdly. Endeavor continued to stare at the boy. "How do you know this?" "I research for any information on anything that seems valuable to me, and I've done a lot of research." He stared back into Endeavor's eyes. He had nothing to say in return and turned back to continue their route. The day dragged on and they stopped for a late lunch. It was beginning to get dark when Endeavor called his sidekicks that took other routes to call it a day and head back to the agency. They were a few blocks away from the train station when there was an explosion behind them. They immediately ran back to the scene and it was chaos. Buildings were on fire and some heroes fought familiar monsters, Nomu. Those are Nomu, the same kind from the USJ. They looked different. The one at the USJ had multiple quirks: regeneration, strength, speed, and kinetic negation. Flux spouted out for their benefit. "The League of Villains is behind this then." Flux stopped those fires. "Shoto, support him and evacuated civilians. You have full permission to use your quirks." "Burnin, with me." "Now go!" Endeavor ordered and blasted off to the fight. Flux and Shoto sprinted off to the nearest fire and to the hero that was trying to contain it. Flux ran past the hero and gently pulled all the flames from the building. He didn't want to turn the mostly still intact building into slag and glass. The hero on the scene watched as his job was done for him as the streams of fire were sucked into Flux's body. One of the walls began to collapse on the top floor and Shoto covered it in ice, stopping it in place. Civilians continued to run out of the now smoking building, and the pair ran off to the next building without stopping to speak to the hero who watched them go. Flux and Shoto didn't speak as they focused on the next building. They took care of another building and helped the civilian get to safety before one of the Nomus attacked them. There was a shout of warning and Flux turned up to see a winged Nomu diving for them. Izuka didn't hesitate and pulled out a handful of ball bearings and shot them with a kinetic blast at the diving monster. The expulsion of kinetic energy caused the projectiles to break the sound barrier and then slammed into and through the Nomu. One wing was torn off completely and the rest impacted into its body and head. It spiraled with one wing gone and crashed hard against a car, denting the side heavily. It lay slumped and unmoving against the asphalt, dead before it hit the ground. Shoto stared at his classmate in surprise at his calculated execution of the monster. The heroes who shouted in warning ran up to the unmoving corpse and prepared to take it down, unknowing it was already dead. "You two get back," one of the heroes shouted at the two. "It's dead. No electrical signal in its body anymore," Flux said, running past them and to the next burning building. Shoto followed after him, leaving the bewildered heroes behind. "Hey, stop right there," one of the heroes shouted at Izuku. He did so and turned to the approaching hero. "What is it?" he asked. "You just killed a villain. Who are you?" The hero prepared to apprehend the boy before him. "That wasn't a villain, it was a bioengineering monster. My name is Flux," Izuku said impatiently. "What are you talking about? You killed it without an attempt to take it down non-lethally." The hero continued to pester Izuku. "That wasn't the first Nomu we've fought. They don't stop and they don't surrender. They just do what they are ordered to do, monsters," Izuku explained and began to leave again to help contain the fires. "I'm with Endeavor if you want to file a complaint." He threw Endeavor under the bus because he could. They didn't stop him again to his relief. "You don't care that you just took a life?" Shoto asked as they ran. "That thing wasn't alive in the sense we are. What Shigaraki said was that they created them if they were alive in there. Then, it would have been a mercy to kill it," Izuku said coldly. "And if they were a villain? Alive, like you and me? If it was necessary, but I have options for taking people down without bloodshed." The next building had screaming coming from one window. It opened and a mother and child coughed out and yelled for help. Izuku released kinetic blasts from his feet and speed up. He left Shoto behind in seconds. Flux left a crater as he jumped to the side of the window. His hand glowed with heat and he caught himself in the handhold. He melted into the outside wall. He absorbed the heat from the handhold and then he began to absorb the heat from the inside of the room with the mother and child. They felt immediate relief from the heat on their backs, but they felt terror when the ceiling cracked and began to creak ominously. The mother turned to the teenager, now that she got a closer look, and pleaded, "Take him." She held the boy in her arms with tears in her eyes. "No!" Flux denied her request and instead grabbed both of them. He held them tight and pushed back, pulling the two out of the window. They screamed in terror and the mother held her child close. Flux positioned his back to the ground and absorbed the impact of both his own and the two in his arms. They landed softly, but they began to crush their savior under their weight. He pushed them to the side and checked them over. Then he heard the room they were in collapse, and then the rest of the building came with it. A barrier of ice grew between them and the building, saving them from any debris that might have gotten flung their way. "Are you two injured?" Flux was able to ask them. "Thank you." The mother pulled Izuku into an embrace by the neck. She was shaken but didn't seem hurt. The mother and child weren't physically injured, but the two students escorted them to where civilians were being evacuated. Once some paramedics saw them coming, they ran over to take them off Flux's and Shoto's hands. They took a quick break and then moved to see where they could help since that was the last building on fire. They were far off from where they began, but they stopped when Flux heard something. He raised his hand to stop Shoto and held a finger to his mouth. He tilted his head and began to jog into an alleyway. Shoto followed and tapped his classmate on the arm. Flux caught the questioning eyes and whispered, "I hear someone." Izuku absorbed the sound around their feet and began to run to the clattering. He felt the 3 heat signatures and sped up. The two arrived just in time for Stain to stab his sword down at Ida's prone arm. He screamed in pain and Izuku held back Shoto from charging. He glared at him for doing so. Instead of rushing ahead, Flux aimed and charged a lightning bolt, not a small one. Stain reacted in time when he smelled the ozone and dodged the streaking lightning bolt aimed at his back. It did succeed in pushing Stain away from the two prone victims. Shoto, get Tenya and the other one. I'll cover you, Flux said and Shoto nodded. Stand aside, my quarrel is with these two. Stain growled and aimed his sword at them. Izuku asked to buy some time for Shoto. You target corrupt heroes? Why Tenya? Stain stared at Izuku and then answered. You are correct, but that one. He jabbed a sword at Tenya, took it upon himself to attempt to be judge, jury, and executioner. You, on the other hand, know why I purged these unworthy heroes. Yes, every single hero was guilty of something. Except for Ingenium, why him? He could sense Shoto begin to drag away Tenya behind Izuku. He got in my way, simple enough. He shrugged. And what do you think of my work? Why are you asking so many questions? Your victims are getting away. Izuku was confused at the way Stain was reacting. Because you are different. I can see it in your eyes. You see the corruption just like me. Answer my question. Your work? You're doing it wrong. He shook his head. Stain tilted his head. Wrong how? Shoto finished bandaging Tenya's arm but still had to get the other hero. You are clipping the leaves of a weed. How do you get rid of the whole weed by the root? Izuku was very aware of how he would have done what Stain is doing. Stain hummed for a moment. You are just like me. He smiled. Why not join me? Help me cull these so-called heroes, roots and all. Izuku's mind flashed with the idea but spoke instead. Not part of the plan. With that, he released a cone of flames down the alleyway. Stain emerged from the flames, injured. He swung his swords at Flux and he blocked with his arm. The impact was absorbed and the jacket saved him from getting a nasty cut. The hero killer was shocked by a spray of electricity that coursed through his swords. Flux pushed his advantage and slammed his fist against Stain's arm. There was a sickening crunch as the kinetic blast shattered his arm. The sword fell from limp fingers, but that didn't stop Stain. His other sword swung up and Izuku stopped it with the palm of his hand. Then he melted the blade and warped the metal of the rest. Stain growled in frustration and backed away as he threw away his ruined weapon. But a blast of the coldest temperature he'd ever felt shocked his system and made him lose focus. His lungs burned with stinging pain with every breath, and the blood that dribbled out of his broken arm began to crystallize. He involuntarily started to shiver from the absolute cold that he was subjected to. He raised his throwing knife and threw it right at the boy's face. He didn't even block, and it stopped dead in its tracks as it made contact. He needed to escape, but not before he took out his target. Flux was prepared for the last-ditch effort to attack him. Stain threw a flurry of weapons at him, but it wasn't in an attempt to kill him. Instead, it was to block his sight and get around him and get to the paralyzed hero. His heat sense didn't let him get away. He pulled from the bag of rubber balls this time and did the same as the Nomu in the sky. Stain leapt off the wall and dove for native. Flux shot the rubber balls and they whizzed through the air at a much lower speed than before. Most of them landed on him in various locations across his body. The impacts drove him off course of his target and landed roughly against the alley wall. Izuku sprinted with kinetic-enhanced steps to the rising figure. He kicked the arm, trying to push himself up, and Stain fell prone again. Stay down. Shoto, how are they? He had his hand aimed at the villain. Tenya yelled. No, Stain is mine for what he did to my brother. He raged on the ground. Stain, what did you do to them? Why can't they move? Shoto demanded the villain. Stain chuckled darkly. Wouldn't you like to know? He said mockingly. Flux began to observe the prone villain from arm's reach. It's your quirk, isn't it? He started without inflection. Stain's eyes snapped to the boy who beat him with raw power alone. That's why you use blades, you cut them. With the blood spilled, you can paralyze them. You would have been so much better than me at culling the unworthy. Stain marveled at the ability to determine his quirk with a moment's notice. Flux crouched down while his hand never strayed. I know. That's why I'm doing it from the inside out. His eyes were cold as ice and his tone held the conviction of absolute certainty. Stain began to chuckle and laugh in joy at hearing his words. "Shoto, have you called for backup?" Flux stood back up. The youngest Todoroki stared at his classmate and then at the villain laughing on the ground. He no longer had an image for Midoriya. Before, he thought of the green-haired boy as someone like him. He was hurt many times but hadn't given up. Their talk at the agency reinforced that, but in Hosu, not anymore. The way he planned out a way to bait Stain with a hero and then how he executed the Nomu with no remorse. Now, he took out the infamous hero killer. Stain alone and left him laughing on the ground. He shook himself out of the thoughts and answered, "As soon as I grabbed Tenya, his wound is bad." Just as he finished, Endeavor arrived at the alleyway entrance and froze at the scene before him. Burnin arrived next to him and did the same. Endeavor approached Flux and motioned Burnin to check with his son. "What happened here?" "From the start," he demanded. "Shoto and I heard a noise from an alleyway after escorting 2 civilians to paramedics. He investigated and we found Stain standing over those 2. He motioned to Native and Tenya. Shoto grabbed them and did his best to help them while I fought Stain. I won. He must not have been very powerful, pitiful." Endeavor growled as he placed cuffs on the villain. Flux didn't correct him and didn't care to. "I received a complaint from some low-level hero you killed a Nomu. Is that correct?" "Yes, while Shoto and I moved to the next building we were attacked." "Will that be an issue?" He tilted his head. Endeavor stared at the boy and shook his head. "I'll deal with it." "Burnin, how are those 2? He turned to his second in command. "They need to see a hospital bed soon. A severe stab wound on the shoulder for Tenya and Native has a slash across his chest. Shallow." Burnin stated. "Very well, let's go." He picked up Stain from the ground by the arm and cried in pain. He immediately let him go. "I shattered his arm." "Don't grab him by the arm," Flux said way too late. Endeavor shot him a glare but Izuku shrugged. He had forgotten. Burnin had already called an ambulance for the 2 injured and a police van for Stain. Ida glared at the back of Izuku's head for what he interrupted. Shoto tried again to figure out his classmate but failed to do so. And Burnin wonders how she could get in contact with that invisible girl for some encouragement. Chapter 20. Changes. From what Endeavor said as they walked out of the alley and to the main road, the rest of the Nomu were dead or captured in one case. There were only 3 when the attack started, with Izuku killing one and Endeavor killing another. The last was taken out by multiple heroes working together until they contained it. The fires were put out in record time thanks to Izuku and Shoto working together. While Shoto mainly supported Izuku, Burnin praised the 2 vigorously. Ida hadn't said anything the whole while they walked and he was helped along. Native had woken up but was too weak from blood loss to move by himself. "I was reported that you killed a Nomu. What happened?" Endeavor said with a demand more than a question. "Shoto and I were running to the next burning building and it dove towards us. I killed it and it crashed into a car instead of us," he said without remorse. "You did not attempt to subdue it, why?" Endeavor questioned. "Nomu do not think, they only follow commands and that is it. They are no more than rabid animals to be put down." Burnin had to reevaluate what she thought of the boy she got to know the day before, and by the looks of it, Shoto already began to. She could see the similarities between Flux and Endeavor, but Flux was cold and calculating to Endeavor's raging fire. They arrived back on the road where police and ambulances drove back and forward. Endeavor hailed one and they pulled next to him. They handed over Native and Ida to the paramedics and they began to work on them. A police car rolled up to them and began to chain up Stain after they were done gawking at the infamous villain. Oddly enough, Stain never resisted and was shoved into the back of the police cruiser. He looked at Izuku one last time and gave him a tooth-filled smile that chilled anyone who was looking. Izuku didn't bat an eye and only watched the hero killer get taken away. He turned from the police cruiser when he heard Ida's name being called out. Manuel had found his intern finally and was looking him over. "What happened? Where did you go?" The hero almost demanded of the student, but he was more worried than angry. Ida didn't respond and only looked away with a scowl. "He went hunting down the hero killer." His head snapped up and glared with his teeth almost bared at Izuku, who had spoken. Manuel turned around at Izuku's voice. "What? Is that true? He turned back around to Ida, who continued to glare at Izuku. It doesn't matter anyways. He will get a slap on the wrist and walk away with a blemished mark on his record. He was part of a family of heroes, and he will get away with being a vigilante just like anyone with enough power could get away with anything. The number 2 hero was a shining example of it. Let go, we are done here. Endeavor commanded, and everyone followed. It took some time to get back to the agency since the train was taken out by one of the Nomu, but it was well past midnight when they arrived. Endeavor disappeared after telling them to clean up and get some rest. Izuku did exactly that with a hot shower and a quick meal. He lay down on his bed and checked his phone for the first time since that morning. He had dozens of calls and over 30 messages from his friends. He winced at the thought of worrying them. He sent a message to his group chat that he was all right, and he immediately got a call from Toru. Since he was alone in the room, he picked up. Izuku, are you all right? I saw the news, and they said that Endeavor's agency was all over Hosu with Nomu everywhere, and now they are saying Stain was captured. He could hear the tears in the tone of her voice, and that made his throat close up slightly. I'm okay. I'm not hurt, Toru. Yeah, we were in Hosu and I helped with the fires and with civilian evacuation. I wasn't hurt. The worst I got was the wind knocked out of me when I cushioned the fall for a mother and child. I'm sorry for worrying you. He took a breath and he could hear her do the same. Also, I fought the hero killer, he admitted without thinking and immediately regretted it. It was quiet on the other side of the call as Toru processed the statement. What? It wasn't on purpose. Shoto and I were headed back and I heard some noise and we went to see if anyone needed help. Ida and a hero called Native were about to be killed by him and I beat him while Shoto helped the two. He hurriedly explained. Toru let out a chuckle and began to laugh uproarious. You beat the hero killer when no one could. Wait until the others hear about this. She kept laughing. Izuku began to worry about his closest friend. Toru, are you okay? She calmed down and said,
I'm okay, Izuku.
I think it's a combination of being tired and the worry that you might have been hurt. You've been up the whole time? Of course I have been. You really worried me. I don't want to imagine you getting hurt and not knowing. She ended softly. I'm all right, please get some sleep. It's late. We can talk some more when you are rested. Okay. Good night, Izuku. Good night, Toru. She hung up the phone and rolled around in her borrowed bed at the agency. She felt relieved that Izuku was all right and the way the call ended. She quietly squealed in joy at how he said goodnight to her. She bolted into a sitting position when she heard a chuckle from the doorway. The hero she was interning at was leaning against the doorframe and softly laughing. How long have you been there? Toru almost screamed in embarrassment and surprise. When I heard yelling, I ran over to make sure everything was all right, but the way you are rolling around the bed like a lovesick schoolgirl. I think you are all right, she said, laughing again as her intern pulled the blanket over her head to hide. Was that the Izuku you were talking about? Toru groaned in embarrassment. Yes, he said he wasn't hurt. That's good to hear. Get some sleep. We'll continue your training in the morning. All right. Good night, Spectre. The hero gave a wave and closed the door behind her. The rest of the internship passed without much excitement after Hosu for Izuku. The only time when something notable happened was the next day when police came into the agency for Izuku and Shoto for using their quirks in public without a license. Endeavor shot them down harshly when he intervened. When they tried to push forward but with the intent of getting Izuku only because of the Nomu he killed, Endeavor ordered them to leave. From then, the police never gave Izuku any trouble because of what he did. Izuku continued his hand-to-hand training with Endeavor and some other heroes that volunteered to join. He gained much experience on that front. They went on patrol a few times more, but only small-time criminals ever showed up while Izuku was with Burnin. The news covered what had happened in Hosu. They covered the Nomu attack to Stain being captured by an unidentified hero. That part surprised Izuku. He had expected Endeavor to take the credit, but when he asked the hero, he only got a non-committal response. The week came to an end, and it was time for Izuku to depart. He left without saying much to anyone. Burnin was the only one that gave him a farewell, but it was short. He boarded the train and headed back to the apartment. He chatted with his friends meanwhile he rode the train. Everyone had a good time with their heroes and learned much. Not all got as much experience in the field, but they didn't complain much. When Izuku walked into the apartment, he felt something wrong. Something in the apartment felt different and he looked around cautiously. He found a note on the countertop of the kitchen. He picked it up and read it. He felt empty as he reread the few words on the paper. Goodbye, Inko Midoriya. He left the paper on the counter and walked down the hall to his mother's room. He opened it and it was empty. Nothing remained in her room. He stared blankly at the empty room with clenched teeth. Everything else in the apartment was still there, but anything of Inko was gone. She had left him while he was gone for the week. He walked to the living room and sat down. Thoughts raced through his head as he thought about what this could mean for him. Inko had left him. He couldn't think of her as mother anymore, and all that she left was one word. Inko's neglect had grown as the years passed, and this was the cherry on top. He had grown to resent her as the years passed, with her never being a mother to him. After a while, he could no longer love her as a mother, but at least she left money for food and had a roof over his head. But now, how long will he last? He had to find out how long he had left to live in the apartment until he would be kicked out for not paying rent. The landlord of the building lived on the first floor of the building, and Izuku left to ask him. His funds from the merch he had sold could keep him afloat, but he wasn't sure for how long. He knocked on the door and waited. The landlord opened the door in a t-shirt and shorts. Midoriya, right? What can I do for you? I want to know when my rent is due next, Izuku asked. He looked confused at him for a moment and answered, Your mama came sometime this week and paid for the next 3 years, utilities included. She didn't tell you? Izuku felt a weight fall off his shoulders and shook his head. She didn't. Sorry to bother you. He bowed slightly and left. Back in the apartment, Izuku sat back on the sofa and rubbed his face. He was angry at Inko for leaving him like this, and he was sad that she would leave with just a note with no explanation. Yes, he had lost the love between a child and the mother, but this felt final to him. With nothing else he could do, he went to make something to eat. That reminded him of his bank account set up by Inko. He checked it and the weekly deposit was there like before. Hopefully that would continue. For now, he would eat and then plan for the worst to happen. But truthfully, Inko being gone didn't change his plans of being a hero. His routine didn't change after Inko had truly abandoned him. He got up, did his exercises, talked to his friends for a bit, and then go to sleep. The weekend ended and Izuku was now headed back to UA for his classes to continue. He walked through the halls of UA until he reached his homeroom. He opened it and was immediately given a hug from a floating uniform. Missed you, Toru murmured, and then grabbed Izuku by the hand and to the rest of their friends, who all welcomed him with their greetings. Izuku felt warmth fill his chest at the smiling faces of his friends. It's good to see you all again. He smiled back at them. You have a lot of explaining to do. You made all of us worry. Mina mock lectured and jabbed a playful finger at him. Seriously, I just finished training and I see the news that Hosu is on fire. Kaminari agreed. Sorry, it wasn't my intention to worry you all. He tried to placate them. Leave the boss alone, he can take care of himself. Zero chimed and patted Izuku in support. What happened? Most of what the news says is that Stain was arrested and that Nomu attacked. Jairu asked. Izuku was about to respond when Ida walked through the door and locked eyes with him. Ida's face contorted slightly as he went to sit down. Izuku scoffed with not an ounce of surprise that he was still in UA. The others caught the whole thing and gave each other surprised looks. Aizawa followed soon after and everyone scrambled to their seats. I'll tell you guys later. Izuku squeezed Toru's hand once more before taking his seat. Aizawa stood at the podium and scanned the room. His eyes lingered on Izuku and he stared back. He moved on and then spoke. Your midterms are coming up. Prepare yourselves. With that, he left the room and classes started as usual. The day's lessons dragged on until lunch came around and his friend grouped up to head to the cafeteria. They got their trays of food and sat together like always. They all stared expectantly at Izuku. Well, come on. Mina was the first to burst out. Izuku chuckled and began to tell them about Hosu. He left nothing out as he told them about the Nomu, him putting out fires with Todoroki, him saving the family of 2, and then Stain. Todoroki and I found Stain over Ida, ready to kill him. I pushed Stain back and Todoroki grabbed Ida and a hero Stain was going to kill. The reason Ida was there was because he went after Stain in revenge for ending Ingenium's career. He went vigilante? Kaminari almost stood out of his seat. Jairu jabbed him with her quirk for being so loud. Apparently, he split off from the hero he was interning at to hunt him down. But we found him face down, ready to be butchered with native. That's why he was glaring at me when he walked in. I interrupted him from taking his righteous revenge. They were quiet for a moment to digest what he had told them. Toru spoke first. I understand wanting to take revenge for what Stain did to his brother, but he would have died if it wasn't for you. The others nodded their agreement. Wait. Mina waved her hands to hit an imagery pause button. Was he found out? About going vigilante and wanting to kill Stain? I sure as shit didn't cover for him when the hero he was interning under found him. Kaminari furrowed his brow. Then shouldn't he be expelled for doing so? Yeah. Police would have found out. And then UA should have kicked him out? Zero agreed. That's the keyword, should. But since he is from a strong hero family, rules can be bent for the powerful. He scowled at his food and jabbed at it frustratingly with his utensils. Toru placed a hand over his arm to calm him down. That's pretty unfair, Jairu said and glanced over at Ida, who was eating quietly while Uraraka tried to talk to him. Izuku shrugged. But forget about that. What about you guys? What did you all do for your internships? He smiled up at his friends. They took the change of subject and they told everyone else what they did. Kaminari got better at his lightning and practiced more with his enhanced movements with internal electricity. Zero also honed the skills that Izuku recommended to him. He even got to use them on patrol once against a thug trying to run away. He was pretty proud of that. Mina was able to cover herself in viscous acid to make a layer of protection like Izuku's theory. Acid mist was still a work in progress. Jairu helped with a hostage situation and learned some hand-to-hand. Toru was last to tell them about her time. So, Spectre helped me with some more sneaking techniques, and the light beam Izuku taught me. Also, something I've been working on, but it's not ready for me to show you guys. Oh? What is this super secret project you've been working on? Mina leaned close to her friend. Come on, show us something? She wiggled her eyebrows suggestively. Toru pushed her away. No, not until I can get it right. Can I help in any way? Izuku offered with a smile. Toru blushed and looked away. Nope. Well, you can, but I want it to be a surprise for everyone. Mostly for Izuku, but she didn't say that out loud. Lunch ended and everyone headed to their next class, Heroics. They were told to meet in the industrial section for class. All Might arrived and looked over them and began. Welcome back. I hope this past week has given you a good look at the real deal. For today, let's see what you have learned. Let's do a race to save the civilian, me. A screen appeared with the first group to race. All Might leapt away and landed in the distance. Izuku was first with Zero, Mina, Ojiro, and Ida. Mina, Zero, and Izuku gave each other fist bumps and got ready. Izuku got ready and ignored Ida's glare to the side of his head. There was a loud boom and they raced off. Izuku propelled himself with kinetic blasts, keeping up with Ida on speed. The speedster kept glancing at Izuku as they sped along in All Might's general direction. He could hear Zero's tape behind him as he tried to keep up with the two. Izuku saw the hit coming from his side and absorbed the kinetic impact from Ida's backhand. Izuku held tight and returned the favor by absorbing energy from Ida and the surrounding area. The engines on his legs stalled as the area turned pitch black and the sound stopped existing. Ida was distorted to the highest degree and crashed hard to the ground. Izuku didn't look back as he heard the class president crash and skid on the concrete. Zero let out a bark of a laugh and tried to get ahead of Izuku, but he poured more kinetic energy out and then launched upwards to where All Might was standing with a frown. Damn! I was really close, Zero said, landing beside Izuku. Midoriya, what happened? All Might stared at Izuku. Ojiro and then Mina arrived just as Izuku turned to All Might. He tried to trip me up and I defend myself. Why? Izuku tilted his head. Yeah, he tried to backhand him. Zero saw it all from his vantage point above them. Ida arrived last with one of his glass lenses broken and his armor banged up. He threw Izuku a venomous glare. All Might pursed his lips in consternation. Izuku watched the number 1 hero shake his head and yell out for the next group to line up. Izuku scoffed audibly at him and walked away. Izuku sat on an empty ledge and his two friends sat with him. Mina groaned. "It's so hot." She felt immediate relief as it cooled. "Thanks." She bumped shoulders with Izuku and smiled. "Anytime." He smiled back. "You guys can call me Izuku if you like." "Oh? You don't think Toru will get jealous, do you?" "I thought it was a special privilege for her only. Something special between you two." She leaned in closer to Izuku's continuous redding face. "Leave Izuku alone." Shiro batted her Mina away from his friend. "You use Hanta if you like. I don't mind either." He smiled at Izuku. Kaminari arrived and sat down with a huff and breathing a bit hard. "If that's the case, then I guess you can use my given name too." Izuku felt warmth fill his chest as he sat with his friends. He had forgotten about the note left for him in the kitchen and only focused on who was around him. He could also understand Ida's want for revenge. If anything happened to his gang of friends, he didn't know what he would do. But he shoved those thoughts away as Toru shoved Mina to the side to sit next to Izuku and gave him a beaming smile only meant for him to see. Chapter 21. Study. After the race was over, everyone changed and packed up their stuff to go home. Ida was one of the first to be out of the door. Uraraka tried to call out for him, but he ignored her. She turned on Izuku for answers. "What happened at Hosu?" "Ever since that day, he's been like that," she asked with both frustration and worry. Izuku calmly answered, "If he doesn't want to talk, then that's his business. It's not hard to connect the dots. Why do you think he was interned in Hosu with a hero with a water quirk? The same city where a specific villain was arrested is somewhat connected to the Idas. That's the information everyone has. You can guess the rest from there." He turned from her confused and conflicted stare to his friends. "You guys want to head out and plan to study for the midterm?" Hanta proposed when he saw their leader was done being brooding and mysterious. "Yes, I need so much help for that." Denki almost cried. "You need help with a lot of things." Kyuka jabbed with a teasing smirk. "Not to worry. Izuku will drag us across the finish line even if he is dragging out cold dead bodies," Mina said with conviction. Everyone turned to her and she blushed slightly. "I'm not dragging anyone anywhere." He chuckled and made to exit the classroom with his friends and Toru holding his arm. "Midoriya, would you be open to helping me tutor some others at my home?" Yairuzo asked the odd boy. "No, I'm going to be helping them to study." He nodded to his gang of friends and turned to leave. Toru pinched him and whispered, "Be nice." Izuku rubbed where she pinched him with his friends giggling behind him at the scene. He turned back to Yairuzo. "I'd rather help my friend, apologies." He heard Toru grumble that was just as bad as before. Once he and his clique of friends had left, Yairuzo let out a sigh. "I'm not surprised he shot my idea down." "What do you think he meant about Ida?" Uraraka asked the heiress. Yairuzo had an idea of what he was implying, but to say it out loud and be wrong. She shook her head. "I'm not entirely sure. He's really weird. One minute he's like that, and the next he is all buddy-buddy with his group of friends." Sato said, "He must have a reason, after all. He was first in both entrance exams." Kirishima said and turned to Bakugo. "You've known him before, Yue? Was he like this before too?" 1,000 memories flashed before Bakugo's eyes. "How should I know?" He grumbled softly and left. "That's another weird thing, he knows something." Ojiro joined in. Todoroki was about to exit the classroom to avoid being questioned, but it was too late. "Todoroki, did Midoriya ever give out any clues why he is the way he is?" Uraraka asked. He stopped and gave out a sigh. "He did, and if you want to know, ask him yourself." He left quickly before any more questions were shot at him. The gang of friends made it to the train station. They chatted about planning for the midterm. In their group, they made up of the bottom four, with Denki being 20th, Mina 19th, Hanta 17th, and Toru 16th. Kyuka was set at 7th. While it may be hard to tutor Izuku's friends alone, he was confident about pulling them up a few ranks. All Izuku needed was what they were lowest in and build from there. Granted, he wasn't expecting them to jump up to the top of his class, but he will make sure that they have passable grades. "So, where are we going to study?" Mina asked. Everyone paused and thought about it. "We do have the clearing," Kyuka said. "Anyone's home big enough?" Everyone paused and thought about it. Izuku didn't want them to come to the apartment even if it was empty. Denki spoke. My basement does have enough space, but I'm worried about getting distracted. Your family loud? Hanta asked. Just my sister. She likes to bug me sometimes. I think I'll be fine. Plus, I want to make profiles for each of you, so I can help you study where you need the most, Izuku said. Mina grabbed him and hugged him with mock tears in her eyes. Oh, thank you. I knew I could count on you. To Denki's house? Toru asked. To Denki's. Mina let go of Izuku and turned back to the trains waiting for them to board. Which one? One train closed its doors and left. That one. He pointed at the one leaving. After arriving at the Kaminari residence, they all filed into the modest home. It was neat but not spotless. It was a well-lived home. Izuku had another pang of jealousy, but pushed it down as Denki's mother peeked around the corner of the kitchen and greeted them all. Hi there. Are you all Denki's friends? It's so nice to meet you all. She gave them a beaming smile. Her hair was in a bun with a few strands dangling around her face. Her hair was a brilliant blonde with small arcs of electricity moving around it. You all can call me Tagawa. I cleared out the basement, you guys head on down there. They greeted her and made their way downstairs following Denki. The basement was more of a downstairs living room with a TV on the wall, a coffee table in the middle, and 2 sofas around it. Denki pointed out the bathroom for them, and then they got started on doing their homework. When they got that done, they moved on to studying for the midterms. Izuku looked at everyone's grades from all their subjects and began to work on a file for each one of them. Kyuka was the only one that didn't need as much help as the others, but Izuku wasn't worried. Izuku sensed someone trying to creep up on them, but paid little mind to it since whoever it was small. Even Kyuka noticed, but only gave a small smile and waited. A small girl peeked her head over the sofa behind Denki. She met eyes with Izuku and he raises an eyebrow at her. Her eyes flickered to Denki and back to his. He gave a minuscule shrug. With that, she stretched a hand out to him and a small bit of blue electricity zapped his neck. He yelped in pain and instinctively batted behind him to hit his sister. Izuku chuckled and Denki pointed at him. Traitor! Izuku kept working on the profile before him without looking up. These your friends? The little girl around 10 asked. Get out of here, we're studying for midterms. The older brother pointed to the stairs. She walked past him and ignored him. She walked right up to Izuku who was sitting and didn't look up. She waited until he did and then she asked, Why did you drag your last match against Bakugo? I watched the whole festival on TV and you only did that with Bakugo. Why? Tanny, Denki said reproachfully. The rest looked worriedly at Izuku for his response. For his part, Izuku set down his pen and turned to Tanny. At your school, do kids with weak quirks get picked on? Bullied? He asked calmly. She thought about it for a moment and then shook her head. Not really, only the mean kids. But they get in trouble when they are caught. Izuku nodded. Bakugo was my bully for 10 years. I just wanted some revenge. She looked confused. But you don't have a weak quirk? That's right. I have a very strong quirk. Tell me who gets bullied worse than people with weak quirks. Izuku's hand raised and flashed through many types of energy. I don't know. She watched his hand, mesmerized. Quirkless are. Go look up Aldra Middle School. Maybe you'll understand. Izuku closed his hand and shrugged while picking up his pen again. She watched Izuku for a minute longer and then tried to zap him. He absorbed it without looking. She tried again with more power and the same result. She turned to her brother. I like your friend. And she skipped off upstairs. Your sister just tried to zap me with enough electricity to make me have a heart attack, Izuku said once she left. What? The non-electric friends yelled.
Denki sighed.
Sorry about that. She has a habit of doing that to people she has met with an electric quirk to test them or something. I'm also sorry about her bringing up Bakugo. He winced more at that than her trying to kill Izuku. Is she always like that? Kyuka asked. Blunt, yeah, always. I'm fine. I think I'm going to tell people I was quirkless without trying to hide it anymore, Izuku said to everyone. Before, I didn't want anyone to find out because I didn't want Yue to be another Aldra and turn to Plan B. Now, it's easier to see what kind of person they are by them learning that information. Izuku felt a hug and turned to see Turu's head. Whatever you choose, I'll be by your side. She squeezed him and he returned the hug. Izuku looked up and saw that the rest nodded their heads in agreement with what Toru said. He subtly wiped his eyes and smiled at them and held Toru close to him. "Thanks, guys." After Izuku calmed down, Mina asked, "What's plan B?" At the time, "I'm sure you have plan BS for different situations now." The rest turned in curiosity at her question. "Drop out of UA and turn vigilante, while probably following Stain's footsteps by getting rid of corrupt heroes and schools," he said casually. Everyone was quiet as they tried to digest what he had said. "Well, good thing Toru got to you first." Shiro gave out a bark of laughter. The rest joined in as Izuku's ears burned at the truth of the statement. They trained some and studied even more until midterm came. Each one of Izuku's friends took the profile he gave them and followed it to the letter. They noticed an improvement in their mock tests and were determined to pass with good grades. Once they finished, Denki and Mina were burnt out from the effort. "I can't anymore, I'm done." Mina had her head on her desk as she complained. "Maybe the practical will be easier." Denki prayed. The class emptied and headed to get changed. Izuku was looking forward to seeing what they gave them as a midterm. He had heard rumors about it being robots like the entrance exam, but he had told his friends not to count on it. Everyone was changed and lined up in front of Aizawa. Then the rest of the faculty followed with Nizu popping out of Aizawa's scarf. The class groaned when they found out about fighting the staff. Izuku got a few mock glares from his friends when he was proven right about the practical. One by one, they were paired off against a teacher. When his friends were paired off, he pulled out his notebook from his jacket. He was prepared to help them as much as he could, even by showing the hero's vital weaknesses. When he and Bakugo were paired last, he knew it wasn't going to be good. As soon as All Might landed, Izuku ignored the hero and turned to his friends to give them the information. All Might was still talking as Izuku got close to Toru first. He gave her the notebook with Snipe's profile. She immediately got it and began to read the whole page. One by one, he gave what information he had to them and then split off to the viewing room. Toru and Shoji were first against Snipe. Toru shared what Izuku had given her and they made a plan. The test started and Toru sprinted off, discarding her boots and gloves. Shoji began to listen and quickly found Snipe when he shot at him, and then smoke canisters arrived at his feet. Shoji began to throw whatever he could at the hero as Toru looped around. When she got close, Snipe pointed his gun in her general direction. "Don't think I've forgotten about you, Missy," he said in his southern accent. "But I'm the distraction," she said innocently. Before he could turn, she emitted the brightest flash of light she could. Snipe cursed just as Shoji bodily tackled Snipe and grabbed his limbs. She casually walked up to the struggling hero and cuffed him. "Hagakure and Shoji pass." The automatic voice said, "Well done. How'd you two come up with that plan?" Snipe was set down and turned to Shoji. He pointed at Toru's area. "An information broker," she said, giggling. Snipe paused at that. "But you didn't know who you were fighting until half an hour ago?" "Yep." They heard her skip off to retrieve her boots and gloves with the plan to give Izuku a big hug for thanks and maybe a peck on the cheek. She flushed with no one to see and shook her head at the thought. How lewd, she laughed to herself. Mina and Denki were waiting for the test to start and they were nervous about who they were matched up against. The two dumbest first years against the smartest hero. What they quickly read about Nizu from Izuku's notebook was that he was arrogant when he thinks he has won, so they will play that to their advantage. The buzzer went off and they began to run, faking to way to the exit. When paths began becoming blocked, they acted panicked and made their way closer to the crane, one street at a time. When they were close enough, they sprinted to the base of it and saw a few robots from the entrance exam. One lightning bolt and an acid splash showed them immune to both. "This is bullshit," Mina yelled and splashed acid onto a pole Denki could use as a weapon. "Throw me at the crane." Denki didn't hesitate and with enhanced strength, threw his friend at the base. She caught herself roughly and began to melt the supports. She heard the crane groan and threw one more splash of acid on another support. "Run!" She took her advice and ran in the opposite direction of the tipping crane. Denki threw away the scrap metal of the pole and jumped off the robot he was on top of. The crane with Nizu inside it collapsed, demolishing the buildings in its path. Once it settled, The two students raced to the cockpit to find it still encased in metal and glass. Nizu was still in the seated position, still drinking tea. Well done. But you won't be able to break this cockpit open in time or get to the exit without failing. Good luck next time. He sounded so smug to Mina that she almost lost it. Mina looked around at the cockpit and found what she was looking for: a vent. Nothing fancy. It's treated metal to resist acid. Nizu saw what she was looking for. Oh ho ho. She laughed evilly. That's fine. You know, Izuku has been teaching us really neat stuff. For example, Denki's enhanced body. For me, a body armor of acid. Her hand excreted the acid and it was covered in viscous acid clinging to her. She whipped it off. But another really difficult thing was making my acid go the opposite direction and make it mist. But I succeeded. Nizu's smug smile fell as he watched Denki sprint away and cover his mouth. His eyes snapped back to Mina. Now, do you want to call my bluff? Or should I do what Izuku warned me about and see how effective this mist is to a living being? A white mist appeared around the pink hand and she gently brought it up to her face and blew it inside the vent. I yield. Nizu scurried up the exit and away from the white mist that did nothing. He turned to the giggling girl in question. Oh, that's just the diluted version. She gave him a smile that didn't reach her black and gold eyes. Hanta's test was the easiest compared to the others except for Izuku. All he needed to do is use his newest attack pattern and she was wrapped up in tape. They left her struggling as they walked through the gates to pass. Midnight tried to goad Hanta to cop a feel since she was down, but he had read her method of entrapment from Izuku. Kyuka's and Kuta's match was horrifying for present Mike. It was a boon for the two because of what Kyuka read about present Mix phobia in Izuku's notebook. She plugged in her speakers and with lots of trial and error was able to find the right frequency to block the hero's attack with her own. Next was Kuta's part, when he built enough courage to command the bugs in the ground. Once he succeeded, all they heard were screams of panic from the hero. When they passed him, he was violently shivering. The gang of friends cheered as Kyuka passed through the gates. Not one of their number truly struggled against the exam. With Izuku's detailed information, they were able to find their opponent's weaknesses and how they fought to counter them. Kyuka walked into the room and she was greeted with congratulations. Kuta walked up to Izuku and gave him a bow. Jairu told me you gave her the information we used to pass. Thank you, he said quietly. Izuku gave him a nod and he walked off. You excited for your match? Toru finally asked. Izuku was set to go last so everyone could watch. Bakugo was on the other side of the room watching the match between Todoroki and Yairuzo against Aizawa. I'll be fine. He gave a reassuring smile to them. I believe him, after all. He's been the one to hand us the information to pass. He probably has plans to take everyone in this building out. Denki said and pointed it at Izuku. Izuku looked away guilty. It's only one good plan. He mumbled. Oh. Mina poked at him to tell them. You know I can release all my stored energy at once. Just do that and glass everything. I wouldn't do that though. He saw the looks he got from his friends. See, I told you he'll be fine. Denki waved away everyone's concerns. And that's a wrap for part 3 of What If Deku Had Energy Absorption Quirk. Big shout out to Big Tedig 3498 for helping bring this story to life. It's been a blast. You guys, the legends are what make all of this possible, so if you're digging the series, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. We've got more fire content on the way, so stay tuned, and I'll catch you in the next one.